Hey, hey,
Hey, what's up, man? Can you
how
hear
you
me?
doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you wonderfully. So
Awesome.
it's nice to have a face to put behind the meme.
Hey, thanks, man. Likewise.
You having a good day? So you have birds? I just I just found this out just looking at your stories today, and I was like, whoa, this guy
Yeah,
has
there's a
birds.
bird. There's a couple birds, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Okay,
we have a conure, we have a green cheek conure, and we also have a parakeet.
nice. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
they're pretty great.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued by birds. Are just such a fascinating animal. Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
they
yeah, you start looking at birds a bit close, and you go, holy crap, this thing is a dinosaur, and it's still here. And
pretty,
yeah,
they
watch them
they are
hunt.
a
They
lot
like,
like
yeah,
dinosaurs.
it's
Like if you watch
so fun.
Jurassic Park, like they nailed it.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating for sure. Yeah, birds, man,
I love
crazy.
it.
Don't mess with birds. I watched chickens hunting rats, and that like you go on like these YouTube kind of like how am I here? How am I watching YouTube? So chickens hunting rats, but here I am, and I'm watching them for like 20 minutes, and I'm like, it's literally like watching raptors hunt
It's
people
it's
on
it's
Jurassic
awful.
Park. It is.
I know it's nuts.
It gave
I
me a newfound
watch.
respect for chickens.
Yeah, there's a an Instagram page I follow. If you love animals at all, if you're listening to this, don't go to this page. But if you like nature or National Geographic stuff,
Mm,
and you want to watch like the rated R version of that, go to Nature is Metal, and it's
yes,
horrifying, absolutely
I
horrifying.
I follow Nature's Metal on Reddit. It's a subreddit as well, and it
Mm,
is
there you go.
intense. It's
Yeah,
intense, but also like there's something there's something deeply grounding to just facing nature and its reality. You know, how often do you
exactly.
hear as a Christian, well, all nature speaks of God and his glories and his goodness. And you're like, have you ever seen like nature ever? Like, have you watched any nature documentaries? This shit is crazy. Like,
A little bit.
everything's getting torn up. Like, animals have evolved to like have like hooks on their penises so they can rape the other like sex. I mean, like, it's like this doesn't seem to display the glories of God in the way that I
For
was told
sure.
it should. It's a very selective way of seeing nature.
No, you're right, and also like the birds are the worst. Like, they
But
really
yeah,
are. Like they are assholes.
that's so funny. That's really funny. My grandfather had a gray parrot, and I think he inherited it from a friend who died, and
Yeah.
his wife did not want it. And
Oh,
this gray parrot like tormented his wife. Like it would mock
yeah.
her. It would like do all sorts of pranks on her and stuff. Like it would
Hmm.
like perfectly impersonate the phone ringing, and then it would impersonate my grandpa, and he would and it would literally be like,
Oh,
hello? Yeah, okay. And it'd be like, Jan, it's for you. And so she'd come running through to the phone and she'd just see this parrot just sitting in the room and it would go, "Ah!" And it's like, I'm like, this is
yeah.
amazing, but also kind of a dick.
A little bit. Yeah. Birds are
Astonishing.
they are highly emotional creatures,
Mm.
and they're very social, and they get attached. And then the more attached they get to different people, the more unattached they also get to others.
Oh, really? So they have a
Yeah.
limited, they're like me. I have a very limited capacity. Once I've got a few really close friends, I'm like, the rest of you are dead to me, you know?
Right. And I think it's also like flock instincts. Like
Right.
Kiwi
Yeah.
is like we're his flock, and he's skeptical of other people, but he's normally pretty cool. But there are some birds like, hey, we don't know you, get the hell out.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Birds, man. I just there because the thing is, to me, I see birds and I see something that is so far removed from me. You know what I mean? Like you see like a chimp or something and it's showing different traits of intelligence and emotion, and you're like, okay,
Mhm.
cool, got it. It kind of looks like me. I'm a kind of okay with that. Dogs,
Right.
even on some level, I'm like, there's some form I can anthropomorphize you quite easily. But then you look at really intelligent birds and you're like like the covids, like like not called corvids, is it the ravens and crows, and
Mhm.
is that what they're called? Is that the branch
I
of,
I
I don't know.
don't know terribly
There
much
you
about the
go. So there
species
you
and
go.
stuff.
But like you look at it
Excuse
and
me.
you're like, whoa, these things are really intelligent, and yet they're so far removed from what I associate intelligence, emotions. I find it hard to anthropomorphize a bird.
Right.
It's really, really. weird. It's like the story of, is it Alex the parrot, the only animal that's ever asked an existential question. So it asked like, what color am I, of its owner.
Oh, I have to look that up.
It's crazy. There's a really good documentary about Alex the parrot somewhere. But this parrot like got depressed, and like it was full on. Like its owner, like they took the owner away from it because they didn't like the course of research that she was moving it in, and there was funding issues, so they just removed her. And like the parrot got really depressed and like was really upset, and it's really, really sad story. It died really young and stuff, and they're not really overly sure why. And like, but like
the person kills.
You look at it and you're like, I wouldn't have pegged the parrot to have been the only animal so far that we've gathered has asked a question about itself. You know,
right.
like something existential of like, what color am I? You know, they're teaching it, what color is that brick? And it's like green, and that's blue, and you know, and it can do shapes or whatever. But then for it to go, and what color am I? Like that's like, whoa, hold on, what's going on right now? And a lot of experts question whether it actually did ask that, and you know, like if that was what it meant, and there's all kinds of layers to that. But it's fascinating.
A lot of times they just like mimic stuff, and they like
exactly.
So a lot of times a parrot will just be like, just mimic what you're saying. Sometimes African Greys, similar to the one that your grandparent have, like they actually know what they're saying. Like they actually have the intelligence of a 5-year-old. So it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. No, it's a weird world, weird world. So, well, we started by the way. That's the intro to this podcast. So,
cheers.
Welcome to the Bird Show. But why don't you give kind of a rough overview of who you are? So, you run the Instagram account Heretical Theology, which you changed the name of recently, right? Is it God?
No, so the handle and username, I don't know. Heretical Theology has always been Heretical Theology. Okay. My name on there was Doubt Everything.
Okay.
And because I was really skeptical and just about everything. And there was a Dale Martin. He's the Yale professor for New Testament studies, and he in his intro class, halfway through the course, which is on Yale Open Courses, says that, hey, I can't remember what the Latin is, but he taught the Latin, do eminis obedium, I can't remember. But basically it means doubt everything. And so that kind of stuck with me. I really liked that. Then my page kind of became less skeptical, and I think it confused a lot of people. And so I came up with kind of a punny name to let people know that, hey, I'm actually Will, and I'm not God's will.
Nice. Okay, yes, that's good. I like that a lot. So that's how I know you. Is that kind of the space that you're operating right now? Like mostly like what you're kind of putting out on the internet is through your Instagram account, or are you doing other things?
Yeah, it's mostly just Instagram. It's easy. And Instagram, as far as getting a voice heard and getting information out there, and kind of collecting a very broad range of people with less trauma like Facebook might offer. And just ease of access. Instagram is great. Its algorithms are pretty simple, and it's relatively speaking, it's relatively simple, and it's like I said, it's catchy, it's easy. I like it.
Yeah,
I do have a Facebook page. But I don't really use it. I basically whenever I post on Instagram, just goes straight to that page.
That's what I do as well. Check it occasionally and then regret checking it. But so how did you get to so in my experience, people that are usually posting about this kind of stuff are generally not kind of coming out of a vacuum and going, I know, I'm going to talk about faith, Christianity, God, having not experienced any of those kind of like worlds and things. So I'm presuming you have come from some form of Christian background of some sort. Is that fair to say? Yeah. How did you get from wherever you were to where you are today? Like what does that look like for you?
Well, I was born in 1985.
Okay.
Just kidding. I'm not going to do that.
You're a year late. You're a year late. I was born 1984. So.
There you go. Fantastic. So I was raised Methodist as a child. Parents were pretty cool. Then at my high school, middle school, there was a church that used a lecture hall for their church services. I got really interested in it. They had free food, so why not? And then they taught the Bible. Actually taught the Bible. I'm like, oh, this is kind of fascinating. And they were doing some end time stuff, which I found really fascinating as a middle schooler. and I kind of got sucked into that. Turns out they were a cult, which I didn't find out until like 2 years ago.
Wow. So that's
Yeah.
quite a while you were in the midst of that then.
Yeah. So we were. So there's three churches in my history. There's a Methodist church, which was just religion, whatever. Then there was like the cult church. That was like the meat and potatoes of my faith.
Right.
And I was there from when I was 14, and then we moved down here to Florida. In what year was it? I'm having a brain fart now. 2015, sorry. So 5 years ago, 2014, and then we started going to a more mainstream mega church, essentially, which were of course evil to the cult church.
Sure. So what was it? What was it that drew you into kind of this kind of cultish kind of environment? Like,
I didn't think it was a cult, obviously. No one actually joins a cult thinking it's actually a cult.
No.
It was just like the way they actually taught the Bible, and I'm like, wow, okay, this makes sense. We should actually know this thing. And they were pretty typical evangelical Christianity. They were non-denominational, but they were very similar to Southern Baptists. Not sure if you're familiar with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not quite Calvinist, not quite Reformed. So in that sense, they're a little bit different than Southern Baptists. But they, in hindsight, so everything's going to be looking at from hindsight. In hindsight, they essentially worship the Bible itself. It was like the fourth part of the Holy Trinity.
Yeah.
And I didn't really realize that until later on, but it was very militaristic in the way that they presented it. The pastor was like, this is what the Bible says, and they're kind of clever, like, we're going to interpret the Bible with the Bible. So this isn't my interpretation. I'm going to interpret this verse with this verse, so we know it's right. And so, of course, any skepticism be like, well, you're still interpreting the verses. So
yeah. But most people in that world don't see that at all, right? You don't see it. You're like, well, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the Bible can interpret the Bible, and well, that's foolproof. And yeah, I guess it must be right then. Like it's so obvious once you step back, but once you're in the midst of that, like you just can't see the logical kind of fallacy within that kind of thinking.
Yeah,
and it is very attractive as well, because it feels very foolproof or very kind of like certain.
Right. No, and certainty is something that I try to hit on a lot on my page. Is I think a lot of Christians they feel like they have to know that they know that they know, which was something that my church would say, the cult church would say, and in hindsight, I'm like, that's not faith. That is certainty, and certainty and faith cannot coexist. I don't think they can coexist. I think that's a fallacy. Some people may want to argue with me on that, and that's great. I was actually on Bart Ehrman's blog page, and he had a critic of his come and actually ask questions. And so it was really cool of Ehrman to do that. And so we got to ask him questions, and I was like, well, you seem like you're really certain about your faith. How do you determine certainty from, like, how do you separate that? And he actually had a really good response. And as an apologist, I was really kind of impressed with what he said. And he's like, "Well, I wouldn't say I'm confident, or I'm certain." He said, "I'm confident in it." So I may have been using both those words earlier. But yeah, so Christians can say they have a strong confidence in their faith, but when they try to prove things, especially things like biblical inerrancy or young earth creationists, in which I was both, it kind of defeats the purpose of what I think Jesus was trying to teach. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that makes sense for sure. So you kind of like were drawn to this community that were really passionate about the scriptures, and were using the scriptures and finding clear kind of like interpretations of the scriptures. Right. Kind of, do you feel that was something that you were missing beforehand? Like, why do you think that jumped out at you as like, oh yeah, I love this? Like,
yeah, what was that? I think I liked the certainty. I liked having the answers. The pastor was very well read. At least I thought he was. When you're in middle school or any adult, it's kind of can come off like someone that they actually know their stuff.
Sure.
They were very. I think the other issue is that they're very like-minded. Like so one of the things I personally struggle with is I'm very angsty. I'm very passionate. I'm very motivated, driven. I want to find the answers. I need to fix things. I need to determine yes or no, right or wrong. That's who I am personally. And that really resonated with me. And the way they came about doing that was like, oh yeah, well, duh, this is how I am. So clearly this is how everyone should be, right? Because we should think, and again, this is not how I think now, but
No, of course. But that
middle
is
school or
that
high
is
schooler will.
pretty common kind of like teenage kind of mentality of like, oh yeah, well, like I figured it out, and I just need to get everyone else to see the world the same way or act the same way or whatever.
Yeah. And so I think that's why. And, I was in there for 15 years. It was kind of fascinating because they're very pro homeschool. I wouldn't say they're anti-science. Well, okay, they were anti-science because they taught anti-science things, but they're like, you can go to college, but think about it. The world's probably going to be ending within your lifetime. Is that really something that you want to invest your time into? What can the world actually teach you? You just be wasting money and time where you could be making disciples. And so that was kind of frustrating for me. But luckily my parents were like, no, you're going to get some college. And so I got a 2-year degree.
That's funny.
And
did your parents see this as quite a kind of like cultish kind of thing? And like, oh gosh, what's he getting into?
So there were some interesting conversations. So one interesting situation that happened was I met a girl. I met lots of girls, obviously. I was a little bit girl crazy, obsessively, which was kind of counterproductive in my spiritual walk. But I did meet this one amazing girl, not my wife. So if my wife is watching this, please close your ears. I'm sorry, love. But she wasn't even divorced yet, though. She was like in a process of getting divorced, but she was cheated on. And so that made it right? Well, my parents had both gone through divorces, and I thought divorce was wrong, except for that one rule. And so that's kind of how legal. I was very legalistic. Sure, so one of my friends from the church kind of like, it took a pastor and another pastor to put me into a room and be like, you need to end this relationship right now. I'm like, but wait, the Bible says like, wasn't for adultery. And then they kind of like, well, no, it's not even with adultery. It's like no divorce, period. And that was the church's stance, which was kind of a radical stance even for evangelicals. And first pastor didn't faze me at all. Second pastor was a little more approachable, kind of showed me some things, be like, you need to end this relationship. And I'm like, okay, I think you're right. I need to end this relationship. I ended the relationship with a girl. Needless to say, it went over as well as you can expect. But then my mom was really concerned. She's like, why did you end the relationship? She was really cool and everything. And I'm like, oh, I get to tell my mom I ended this relationship with this girl because she was divorced. And of course, my mom has also been divorced. So this is going to go great.
Yeah.
And it was a little rough. I'm not going to lie. It put a little not trauma, but a little bit of distance between my mom. And she's like, well, that's just way too extreme. My mom is she's a mom. She's great. She's not very well read. She's got a high school education. She's really good at raising children and working at home and doing the whole domestic wife thing. Not that she lived in that parameter very well, but she was a very Southern kind of gal, and that's just how her life was. And so I was able to out-argue with her on every single level, even though emotionally and logically she would probably have won if she would have known how to do it.
Yeah. Wow. So like that did that kind of like, that wasn't enough to make you question what was going on though. You were still kind of enough in this that it was like, well, nope, got a clear answer. The Bible's clearly saying divorce is wrong. And so breaking up with a girl, kind of even to the point where I'm awkwardly confronting my mom. Like that wasn't enough for you to
verses.
go,
but there's Bible verses where it's like, oh nope, there was that path, you gotta have that radical faith. The world's gonna hate you. You're gonna have division between mother and daughter, or father and son. Jesus even said he came to bring the sword and to bring division. So this is gonna happen. So I'm thinking like, yeah, this was a right decision because these bad things are happening.
Yeah. It's such a weird component. It's in there in the majority of religions on some level. This amazing kind of get out clause, isn't it? Like where it's like, oh yeah, and when this all kind of falls apart, well, that's not your problem, and it's not the problem of this thing. It's because everyone else is wrong, and they just can't see the ultimate truth, or they're not using the Bible as their kind of like plumb line, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
It's you can't lose. You've got this kind of perfect system that's kind of backing you up on every front.
Right.
It's a very interesting dynamic, and gets more extreme when you get into kind of cultish, kind of like, well, the world's ending, we're going to bunker in even more, expecting everyone to persecute you, whatever that looks like, can get worse and worse, really, doesn't it? I mean, you look at
Yeah.
something like Waco or something like that, like how extreme it can become, where you kind of are like expecting the world to be against you and whatever. And I've no doubt when you look at Waco, there was a lot of elements where they were against them regardless, or whatever, that wasn't a necessary black and white situation regardless of their religiosity or cultistness. But like it's these reinforced beliefs, I guess, that is a undercurrent of quite a lot of Christian faiths. That we're looking for the world to persecute us, to attack us, to whatever, and therefore we'll read anything that's pushing back against what we believe. It's just persecution, it's just the devil, it's demonic, it's whatever. That's fascinating. So you existed in this world for 15 years though, that you
right.
day in day out, it was great, it was fine. Like, at what point did you start to kind of like, was it just because you moved to Florida that you moved into something else, or was that because you moved out of that, or how were you engaging faith over those 15 years?
So a little bit of context, like all my Christian friends thought I was a wild rebellious one. Okay. All my secular friends, non-Christian friends, thought that I was the self-righteous prude. I could never win. Okay. That's kind of that's kind of where I'm at. So I had that dynamic. And so I always, my youth leader at the time, he's like, I have a freaking Anakin Skywalker on my hands right here. And he was talking about me because I'm constantly rebelling against authority. I constantly was questioning things like, well, this doesn't make sense. Or I get into sword fights, as he would call it, with other Christians, debating apologetics and why I'm right, they're wrong. And he got really frustrated with it. He had a lot of patience with me. And so he literally would compare me to a young Anakin Skywalker. And I guess in a sense that was kind of prophetic, in the sense that I did end up going to the dark side. But so really random nerd note, episode 3 is still one of my favorite Star Wars episodes. I know it's going to be highly controversial.
Yeah.
But and movie element wise, I know it's not amazing, but I could really relate to that movie. So,
sure, yeah.
Like, I was being torn up inside constantly, and with how Anakin, I'm sorry, this is not answering your question also, I apologize.
No, it's fine, it's good.
But it's a good picture though. So if you want to give it like a visualization, like seeing how Anakin went to the dark side was a lot how I deconverted. There's a lot of elements there, and to this day I will still tell you that if I had to choose between being a Jedi or being a Sith, I would choose a Sith every single time. Every single time. I don't agree with everything the Sith do, obviously, because killing people and things like that is kind of a bad thing, but Jedi on the other hand aren't perfect either. And I think Christianity thinks that I know that's a huge generalization, they all think that everyone thinks that they're right. And they all think that, well, we have some things wrong with this, but generally we're good. And it was within those holes, within that wiggle room, that I started realizing that there might be some more to this. And my wife actually had a lot to do with my deconversion. Oh, wow. So again, going back there with Padme, with Anakin, is my wife was like, there's just, she was not clicking. She was done with the church. I can't exactly remember why the details, but she was having a hard time connecting with people. Right. It was a small church. We were a no-child family. People were killing us when we're going to have kids. Newsflash, we still don't have kids. FYI, none of your dang business. And she had a master's degree in chemistry. Most of the people there have, the highest education there was a 4-year degree. And that was, I think someone had that in of course, Bible and some sort of Bible studies, college level education. And so she is for them. And so I remember going online, this is where I'm still in Ohio, going online and trying to find another church. And of course, knowing me, I'll be like looking at all their doctrines that they have listed in the About Us section.
Got to check them out.
I looked at 36 churches. There was not a single one within a 15-mile radius or 20, 30-mile radius that fit what I would determine to be a legitimate church.
Wow. It's a lot of heretics, man. You're just surrounded.
I know. It's crazy, right? We talked to a pastor about it, told him we were kind of struggling, and we ended up going on a vacation to down here to St. Augustine. And then our goal was to stay in St. Augustine for a few days and go down to Daytona for a few days. But we're also coming down here to Melbourne to visit my brother, who was just conveniently enough became a Christian a few years ago.
Oh, wow.
Interesting, because he was a Christian, then wasn't a Christian, now he is a Christian again. I'm like, this is fantastic. I want to see this church. My wife was very excited because she thought that this was a potential opportunity, one, to have a good reason to move to Florida, because hello, Disney is amazing. And Florida is amazing. She hates the cold winter, but also because she was thinking this might actually be a hope to find a new church. And I vehemently told her, love, we're going to be here visiting my brother. We're not here to find a new church. I was a complete asshole about it. And I told her straight up, this is how it's going to be. Because, hello, head of the household here laying down the law. I didn't do that. I hardly ever did that. But when she kind of pressed on spiritual issues like that, I would definitely be the one to do that.
Right. Once the system was getting potentially in jeopardy, like that's a good kind of like one to pull out of the bag occasionally and go, okay, we're drawing a line here. Yeah.
So so this is still part of my actual Christian testimony. So my spiritual growth keeps increasing here. So this is the best part's yet to come. My wife prayed that night, which she's not a spiritual person. She's a very logical person. She's not an emotional person. And she fully believed God gave her peace and be like, okay, trust your husband. Great. She had peace about it. She's like, okay, we're not even going to consider going to this church.
Yeah.
Whoa. Hey, God spoke. Fantastic. We ended up going to the church. It was a Mother's Day weekend. And so I had been listening to what the pastor had been talking about for a couple weeks back, just so I can be in line with him. And he was going through the Bible verse by verse. Hey, thumbs up. That's what you're supposed to do. Expositorial teaching. Excellent. That's a +1 for the church. But it's also a mega church. My old church was like 120 people.
Right.
Okay. This church had 10,000 over 3 campuses and 3 whatever. So and my brother is showing it off to me. Oh, check this out. This is the gymnasium. This is the sanctuary. This is the other sanctuary. This is the 3rd sanctuary. I'm like, cool. Awesome. I'm like, I don't care. So we get to the sermon, and it's not even about what the head pastor was talking about for the last several weeks. It was like one of those special guests
one-off
welcome sermons. Okay. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, okay. Well, it'll be a nice little sermon. Hopefully I'll get some stuff out of it. And I was not at all going to ask about visiting another church. I just wasn't. I was not going to go out of my way to say, hey, what about this or that? Because that would be me putting forth my effort to have God speak in sense. In other words, if God wants me to make me have a church switch, he's going to make it abundantly clear. And it's not going to be on any effort of mine. So guess what happens? I have about 3, 4, 5 doctrinal issues in the back of my head that absolutely have to be answered before I even consider going to a different church. 10 minutes in, answer 1. Boof, out of nowhere. Pastor just rambles it off. I'm like, whoa. 15 minutes in, the sermon was like 45 minutes long. Another one gets answered. And he ends up going, not even just answering all these questions that I would have to be answered, but he goes in like specific details about it, and then even gives me a different perspective that Will, who is Bible thumping Will here, hadn't considered before. I'm like, wow, oh shit, what is happening? And I'm like, I'm getting nervous. I'm like, oh God, literally, oh God, what the hell is happening?
Yeah.
Without the hell. And so I start praying. I'm like, God, what are you trying to tell him? He's like, shut up and listen. I'm like, okay. I keep on listening, and the pastor just keeps on going on and on with all these great points. I'm like, I just get this peace, and I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified because my church up in Ohio, the call had a huge church split. It was disastrous. It was nasty. It was like just every single person having a divorce with each other. So think of like a marital divorce with like 50 people.
Wow.
heartbreaking. And I'm like, they're just gonna think I'm just leaving the church again, just like those heretics. I'm
Yeah.
like, God, what? How can these are my friends? This is my family. He's like, who do you trust more? Oh no, he says, who? I hear this voice in my head, and he's like, who do you fear more? And clearly the issue was, do you fear them or do you fear me? I'm like, I literally threw up my hands in the middle of the service really awkwardly. It was crazy. It was not a
It's funny.
I guess
it's like the
was
person having a
encouragement,
conversation in the corner by themselves, and everyone's like, "What is happening right now?"
So I pull out my phone. I type in a text. I'm actually saying I just type it in my phone. I'm like, I think God might be calling us to this church. ... I show it to Stephanie, and she just looks at it. She's got a big old smirk on her face,
Nice.
and that's it. So we talked to a pastor over there, and he's like, yeah, absolutely. God might be calling you to our church, but are you sure? I'm like, I think so. And the next thing he does, he looks straight to my wife, doesn't ask me. He looks straight to my wife and says, what do you think? I'm like, that's cool. And she's like, yeah, maybe. And so that was it. That was in, at the end, so Mother's Day. So I was in May, and 6 months later, we quit our jobs. We had some very awkward conversations with our church. There wasn't much of a send-off. They just kind of like, well, bye. They didn't even say anything. We've been here for 15 years.
Wow.
No farewell or anything like that. Nothing.
Wow.
And that was kind of heartbreaking. Like, they just didn't really care. And like, okay, this is it. And then some people are like, yeah, this is your last weekend here, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, kind of is.
Wow. How
So
involved
that
with that
hurt.
church? Was there a leadership structure there and things like that? Had you kind of get involved with that sort of thing, or
at the old church or
the old church that you were leaving?
No, I was way too radical and rebellious to be in. And again, they already had 3 pastors, and it was a church of 100 people.
Right.
So that alone was already kind of odd. They do lots of weird stuff, but
wow.
So we
how did they perceive you going? Like, was there a narrative behind that of like, oh, you're being rebellious or you're leaving us in a negative way, or was there just a like, okay, cool, that's fine?
I still don't know, to be honest. I don't talk to most of the people there anymore now that I'm a full-on atheist.
Sure.
The whole Trump thing caused a lot of turmoil between me and them, and they were probably like, he's in Ohio, or they're in Ohio, he's in Florida. Why would I even care about this guy anymore? And so that alone killed a lot of relationships. Yeah, because I did not support God's chosen president. And so we ended up quitting. So we ended up quitting both our jobs. I had a business, a photography business. I was starting to get repeat business that I ended. Stephanie, my wife, had 2 jobs. We quit both those jobs and moved to Florida jobless.
Wow.
Because we believe God had called us to this church.
It's crazy, isn't it?
I love it. 1,000 miles. We literally moved 1,000 miles because we felt God called us. And so this is what I'm gonna rant for a hot second here, dude. So this is what fucking pisses me off when Christians say you are not a true Christian. Okay.
Yeah. You're right. I must have just done this for fun. Yeah, exactly. I quit my job. I jeopardized everything. I moved across the country to pretend to be a Christian, so you'd be more convinced now. Of course not. People are passionate about what they believe.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. That's intense, though. I mean, like, I did a similar thing of like giving up my business. I ran a company, walked away, moved to California from Scotland. Like, I've done that intense thing, and it's amazing. It's exhilarating. It's you feel I'm doing what God wants me to do. It's amazing, but it's a big deal. It's not like not a small deal. It's scary. It's just intense. Like you're going out there. You don't know anyone, or maybe a few people. You got your brother or whatever. But I'm gonna have to make new friends. I'm gonna have to try and build something from scratch. Like, that's intense. It's really intense. And there's the grieving as well of losing what you did have, especially if they're kind of like, we don't care. See you. Like, that's grieving the loss of a community of 15 years. That's a lot to be going through, for sure.
It was a lot, and it was just straight up painful. And then it was even more painful when they abandoned me, essentially. And I'm like, there's been a lot of build up and a lot of teardown, not just with my faith, but socially.
Yeah. How was this church that you were part of very community driven, orientated?
Yes. I was at church, anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week. And I actually, when I moved to the inner city, because I actually married my wife when she was still in college.
Okay.
And so we moved to the inner city, so that she can keep on going to school and stuff. And so it was like a 45-minute drive to get to our church. Wow. Yeah. And we're out in rural Ohio. And, so yeah, it was very community driven. They started having a riding arena for children who have, it's called hippotherapy. They use horses to help kids who are paralyzed, and they do it completely for free. Humanitarianly, like, that's awesome. Like, it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the catch is, like, hey, they have to listen to our Bible studies, and they straight up teach literally mentally handicapped children who are 5 years old that, hey, they're going to hell if they're not saved, and the world is also 6,000 years old, and you have to believe this, and this. And they're teaching children this.
It's wild.
And they're like, and there's been families and parents who have straight told them, we're not bringing our children here anymore. And then they end up going to a place that costs $1,000 a day or whatever for this, or not a day, but it's very expensive. And our pastor is on the podium saying, I can't believe that they would do this, that they would reject such free care. Like, that's how much they love the world. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's it. Like,
it's more, that's how dangerous what you're doing is. Like, it makes you think of, it's become a thing now in America. Thankfully, it took a while in America for conversion therapy to be completely made illegal. I think across the board federally, that's kind of positioned, and statewide, some states have kind of like allowed certain things.
It's definitely still happening. Like,
yeah. Oh, it happens. Oh, yeah. And the labels change and whatever. I mean, like, I'm very aware. Churches I've been affiliated with are still running things, and I've had spoken out about some of that stuff. So but the point being that, like, the government is recognizing, hey, this stuff that you're doing is mentally very dangerous. You're creating mental health issues, you're boosting suicide rates, all sorts of different things. It does make me wonder if 20, 30, 40 years from now we're going to start seeing some form of like step in from the government, which the church is going to love this, right? Going, hey, like, teaching mentally handicapped, like, differently abled children that aren't really able to conceptually grasp this stuff, even a neurotypically kind of like minded child is not in the place to be told, hey, you're going to burn forever for eternity. Think of the longest time you can think of. Now times that by billions and billions. You're going to burn in your own fat for that long if you don't believe this thing. Like, that's traumatizing. I deal with people day in, day out that have that trauma, and they're adults now. And it does make me wonder, like, how long is it going to be before people are recognizing that, and that's becoming a normative thing that the government's going to have to step in and go, you can't provide a service for free just as an excuse for you to traumatize people, like, which is on some level what's happening. Not how they see it, obviously.
I think the face mask issue right now is a really telling situation of how that's going to play out. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you follow it, but I mean, it's kind of I can't associate myself with it anymore, just because it's so triggering and just frustrating seeing church. We're not going to wear our face masks because the government tells us to. Yeah, whatever.
It's wild. It's a really surreal thing, because on some level, I mean, the point of wearing a face mask is a selfless thing. It's not about you. It's about other people.
Exactly.
And there could not be a more there's no Christian ethic deeper than loving other people and laying down your own life for other people. That's the core of Christianity.
Go figure, right?
That's so at conflict with the core of Americanity, which is individualism, exceptionalism, me. And so you see this like conflating, this clash of Christianity and Americanity, and one side wins 9 times out of 10 in the evangelical church, which is, okay, no more selflessness, no more laying down our lives for our neighbors, no more loving our neighbors. We love ourselves. We take care of ourselves. We have our way first. And then if there's any leftovers, and that's what you're seeing in the mask crisis is fascinating. And it's why you see in other cultures, like Asian cultures, they wear their masks all the time. But it's because in Asian culture, the culture is, we are part of a grand society, and how dare I go out sick and potentially jeopardize someone else's health. That's just the norm. So that's why they were doing that long before this pandemic, and a few other pandemics as well. But it's just fascinating to see this, like, that American threads that the average American is more selfless than the average American Christian. It's like, how has Christianity become like the definition of selfishness? Like, it's such a bizarre component. Very, very bizarre. Even if you're like, I'm not sure this is working, put a mask on. That's fine. It's not a big deal. Who cares? Right. You know what I mean? But that's not, you can't even, you've got to like go, well, no. Someone's telling me to do something. And it's the narrative of governments are evil. The world is evil. Science is evil. Like, we've got to have these enemies to fight in this form.
Well, it's a precursor to the mark of the beast. Didn't you know that?
Exactly. Wow. Some of them are wearing them on their foreheads. So who knows?
Yeah, that's funny. That was great.
It's crazy. I go into so many supermarkets, and this is in the UK. Like, we've got our own shit going on for sure. But the amount of people in supermarkets, it's the law is if you're in a public place, you have to wear a mask. But they're like, I don't know if it's a protest or whatever, but like people wearing a mask, but like, up on their heads or on their chin. And I'm like, you are wearing your mask, but you do realize that's not working, right? Like, I'm like, are we stupid? Are we protesting? I'm not sure what's happening right now.
That's actually pretty great. I love that.
Or just that's over funny. The mouth is always a funny one as well, and it's just like,
right.
Okay.
That's not how that works.
Yeah. It's on the way. It's 50%, I guess, but
right.
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating thing. That kind of component. I can't remember how we got onto that, but
oh, my bad.
No. This is this podcast summed up is constantly derailing. Right. I just had a chat earlier today with another guy on the podcast, and he works for a car manufacturer up in Detroit, and he works in the tech side of like the autonomous vehicles and stuff. And we ended up talking for like 25 minutes of the podcast about futurology, automated cars, where are we going?
I could talk about that stuff for a while.
Absolutely.
Too.
So I just that is this podcast. We go where it goes, and that's okay. So
yeah,
it's all good.
Right. No, it's funny that you talk about that though, because like I've been soaking up so much like science stuff lately, and it's funny like listen to Michio Kaku, like he's been great, and like he's all about like becoming a stage 1, stage 2 civilization. And I'm like, holy crap! Like he's right. Like he absolutely wants to create a one world order. Like this is fantastic. Science supports revelation. Oh my god, this is gonna be terrible. Like
this is not gonna go down well with a lot of Christians.
Nope.
Oh, it's so funny. Like I remember someone was talking about we have contests. I don't know if you do in America. I think you do through Apple Pay and stuff. They've kind of pushed that forward, but contactless payments, using near fields communication and stuff, like that's just everywhere in Europe. You don't use cards anymore, or like
that's interesting.
Like crazy.
We still use cash.
If you use a card, you touch it or something. And yeah, exactly. But I go to America and I'm like, I have to sign and then show you my driver's. Like, what is this? This is like the 1800s. I'm like, what's happening? It was such a culture shock to me. Anyway,
that's awesome.
It's just funny because we're like, and then there's people that have actually just implanted the chips in their hands, so they can just wave their hand over the machines and pay. It's just quicker.
Are you serious?
And they're like, sure, it's a chip. I'll put it in my hand. I can pull it out. And I'm like, that sounds amazing. But there's an evangelical part in the back of my brain going, don't put chips in yourself.
Are you serious?
But we're there. Like, people are doing that. And I'm like, God, people are not going to like this. It's just a chip. It's a near field. It's not like tracking you. It's not GPS. It's not like, but it's something you put in your hand to pay or whatever. And I'm like, it's going to go down badly. People are going to get upset. It's just further promoting the idea that Europe is definitely falling off the end of the abyss into Satan's suckling on Satan's teat at this point, probably. But
that's crazy that people are actually doing that though. Like that's I thought you were joking at first.
No, that's a thing. People, but it's a whole movement. I read a National Geographic article about this a couple of years ago of people implanting different cybernetic kind of components, and there was one person that implanted something that enhanced their smell. because they, I think it was something to do with they didn't have a proper sense of smell, had been damaged or whatever, and they'd implanted this thing, but it allowed them to smell in like ways that they'd never been able to smell as a human, and it was like insanely specific, and like so they could pick up little scents in a room, and so they could tell that you had walked in the room when no one else would, because they knew like by micro particles in the air like your smell, and they could ID that so easily. And I'm like, that's cool. Also terrifying if you're walking down the street and you've stepped in dog shit or something. You know what I mean? Like that could go badly. But it's fascinating, these kind of like, where we're heading there. We are heading there where people on technology are going to become more and more interlinked, right? You look at bionic arms or anyway.
No, that's actually really cool. I actually read a book called Amped. I can't remember his name. I think his first name is Daniel, but if you look up just Amped on Goodreads or something, and it's actually about that. Like it's like these little microchips, whatever enhancements that go into your brain, and they just basically make you a superhuman and does stuff like that. Like, so wow, okay.
That's great. We are so close. The guy I was just talking to, like, he was like talking about like back in the day, you go back to the 60s or whatever, and sci-fi was just this like crazy, wild, like let's dream these like crazy ideas. And now today you turn on the average sci-fi and you're like, yeah, okay, I reckon we'll get there. Like, there's very rarely do I see things that I'm like, that's never going to happen. Maybe like, you know, some sort of like warp speed or I don't know. But like most things I'm like, yeah, cool. Yeah. Like most futuristic kind of movies have like automated cars driving everywhere. And I'm like, well, yeah, obviously we'll be there in like 10 years probably. It's just really crazy how like much that gap has kind of closed. And yeah, a lot of Christians are terrified of that. I'm excited, but a lot of Christians, that is... for whatever reason, the narrative they've created is that is the end times, that is evil, that is scary. I think it's progression, and Christians are scared of moving forwards because they, not all Christians to be fair, but most Christians have, because of the way they interpret the Bible and read the Bible, they've set a goal. The goal of Christianity is in the past. And so any progression forward is just a move further and further away from the past, which is really where they were trying to bring society is. Can we move backwards? Can we go back to woman as property, gays get stoned, whatever? I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy, really crazy.
A little bit, yeah, for sure. And even just saying the word progressive is very triggering for a lot of evangelical Christians.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a really scary... I was just on a podcast with someone, God is Grey, Brenda, I can't remember her name actually. Brenda, anyway, and the title of it was what the fuck is progressive Christianity? And we were talking about progressive Christianity, which is funny because I'm not a progressive Christian. I'm actually quite vocal against progressive Christianity a lot of time. I think it's very helpful for some people. That's where they land, and it's great. And so it's fine for our audience, which are progressive Christians mostly. But yeah, it's fascinating just seeing this she's got like a huge following. She had like 100,000 people on YouTube, and it's massive. And so like in about 2 minutes after posting it, she's got like more comments than I've got on every post I've ever put on YouTube, you know. And I'm just reading through, and so many are like very positive, obviously, but so many are like, progressive Christianity is the Antichrist, or progressive Christianity is going to destroy the world, and you guys are heretics. And I'm like, wow, like you're fighting with yourself here. Like the issue you have, if your issue is with me, I'm not even a progressive Christian, dude. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you have no idea how dangerous I am if you think that's dangerous.
Right.
It's fascinating.
No, and a year and a half ago, I would have been one of them people commenting saying those exact same things.
That's crazy. It's just wild. So keep going with your story, because I'm happy to go on these derails because I love them. Fine. But I want to make sure we, at least by the end of it, kind of figure out who is Will Thorpe and how did he get here. So you are now in Florida. You're settling in. You're going along to this mega church. What kind of church was it? Was it kind of on brand, similar to your cult? Not like, I'm not saying it was a cult, but similar to, not at all. Because I'm like,
not at all.
Surely you policed this a bit. You read through the statement of faith. You kind of were like, well, who are these guys? It must have passed on some level.
They were so they were a Calvary Chapel denomination, which they don't claim to be a denomination, but they're a denomination. They have five points, not Calvinist points, but just 5 very generic things that you must subscribe to be a Calvary Chapel. And that's it. I don't remember what those 5 things are. I used to. I don't remember anymore. But one thing that really de-radicalized me was the difference between what they call an open hand issue and a closed fisted issue. So at my old church, every single thing was a tight gripped issue. You must believe A through Z, 1 through 10, all the subpoints, everything. And basically the Calvary Chapel Church basically taught me to freak the hell, or calm the fuck down. Just like, hey, not everything is a closed fisted issue. We can disagree and have some wiggle room on some things. That was so helpful. Wow. Even just for me as a personality trait, like, because that's, I mean, I'm still incredibly angsty. Like I have like the stereotypical white male sensitive ego insecurity. Like that's me. I'm sorry. I hate to admit that. But it's
the painful truth. Yeah. It's like, yes, I'm white and fragile. Yes.
I mean, I blame, I was also in the military. So I blame the military for a lot of that because they taught like, you must be mentally tough. You must be mentally strong, physically strong. You know, you see an enemy, you destroy the enemy. That's the mentality that we have. Like there is an authority structure. So the military also probably had a lot to do with my cult background. Now I'm thinking about it. And so so it's now Christmas time, in 2014, 2015. And I'm going door to door trying to find a job. I eventually find a UPS store that their graphic designer literally just put in their 2 weeks notice. And I'm like, great, fantastic. I will take this graphic design job working 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week at $10 an hour.
Wow.
That was all I had. And so this was a funny thing. Like I actually made a trip down here before we moved because I'm big in networking, shaking hands and meeting people. I probably passed out 100 resumes, met 50 people, had a couple opportunities. Not a single one of them played out.
Wow.
I was really hoping that God would give me a job before we moved down here. That didn't happen. So we still moved down here. I did find a very horrible, no benefits, not kind of crappy hour, okay pay job. I was actually very happy with $10 an hour.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Once you've done a while at no dollars an hour, that is a big jump.
Yes, but still, that ended up being $200 a week.
Right, it's
like,
not much.
That's not,
especially in America, where exactly, you've got to cover a lot of things that.
So my brother worked for a corporation called Harris, and they are a communications contractor for the government. And he was an Air Force officer, so he did a lot of liaison stuff with the government and with civilians. And so that he does like a 6-figure job doing multi-million-dollar contracts. And so he sent me an email saying, "Hey, there's this one department at Harris that it kind of sounds like it's right up your alley. They analyze satellite imagery." I'm thinking like, I can't get a job at Harris. I got a 2-year degree. Like, what's going on here? He kind of coached me on how to make a resume for it, and I put it in. I am pretty sure someone owed him a favor, and within a month, I had a new job working at 40 hours a week, full benefits.
Nice.
God provided, right? Yeah, this is amazing. I had to go through this shit first and just trust him.
It's amazing how it is how prayer works. It's how everything works, right? We see the positive and it confirms. We don't see the negative to disprove. You know, it's incredible, right? God healed that person, but he didn't heal the other 5 people I prayed for. But God heals. Right. And it's like, well, maybe, I mean, that person did get healed or whatever, so that's great. So yeah, maybe you got a job, that's good. But given the randomness and how this didn't pan out hundreds of times, could it be that your bro greased some wheels somewhere for you or whatever, you know? Like, and who knows, maybe they thought that resume was like sick. I don't know. Like, it sounds like you've had a colorful past. Like maybe it was like, they were like, this guy sounds great.
The interview was weird. Like because like, I'm like, got my suit on, everything else. Let's do this. I'm like, oh, please God, I need this job. I cannot work at the UPS store any longer.
Right.
Like, and I even told my manager, he was really shady too. I'm like, hey, by the way, I got an interview over here at Harris. I'm just being completely transparent and upfront with you. And his face just like went white because I was essentially, he did not know how to run the graphic design side of things. Yeah. And sure enough, I at the interview, it wasn't even an interview. They were like, "Are you sure you want this job?" I'm like, yes. Like, why would I not want this job?
That's so funny. That's such a sketchy way to start, So, are you sure you want to do this? You're like, whoa, what am I going into here?
So it's in a secured vault. It's working on classified material for the government. So some anti-war people may not particularly care that I do this particular job. But it's in a vault. I come in, I work 10 hours a day, I sit at a computer, there's no windows, I can't really talk about what I do, and then I leave. It can be very depressing. In fact, most people who go there instantly gain like 40 or 50 pounds within the first year. Wow. And it's kind of crazy. I actually did the opposite. I actually was weighing close to 300 pounds when we moved down here to Florida.
Wow.
Yeah, so
that's crazy.
It was a little bit crazy. So I've actually lost 100 pounds. And of course, I gave all glory to God for that as well.
There you go. It's amazing.
Had nothing to do with my discipline.
He lifting the weights for you and running and eating better.
Yeah, right.
Prepping your meals. All right, here you go, Will. I've made you a Caesar salad.
But that's where your mind is. And I don't think it's just limited to Christians who are raised in a cult. Like, I think when people believe in a God, they want to attribute things to that God. And I can understand, I can sympathize that. Like, you want to believe and you want to, be like, you want to have happiness with that relationship with your deity. And I get it. We go out of our way to try to find the good things in people. And it makes sense that Christians would do the same thing for God.
Yeah.
If I can toss them a bone there.
We create narratives that give our worlds meaning that help us. And at the end of the day, it's really easy to shit all over any religion. You can pick one and just, go, oh, look at that and look at this or whatever. But, but they help people in different seasons of life, in different ways of life, in different cultures, whatever it might be. Some of these things can be very helpful. They can be stories in which we frame our worlds, in which it does help. And so I saw you post, was it on your story? It was about Dave Ramsey or whatever. And I was like, that's really funny. He was saying, like, what was he saying? Something is king.
He said,
Cash is king. And you were like, isn't Jesus king for you or something? I was like, that's hilarious. But like someone like Dave Ramsey, I'm like, do you know what? Because I was in a huge amount of debt when I was younger. I started my business. I did most stuff, but I was just like, I spent a lot more than I made. We got myself in a stupid place, and then came across Dave Ramsey, started reading that, and I was like, gosh, I'm going to start budgeting. I'm going to start tithing. It was one of the things I started doing as well. And I'm just going to be really more intentional. And to me, God had led me to Dave Ramsey. God was giving me the strength to look after my finances, to start giving, to stop spending, to, budget, all these different things. And I don't know if I didn't have that framework of God, if I'd actually have kept to the budget, if I'd learned to be generous, if I'd stopped spending, if I could find that kind of meaning behind it that allowed me to get free of that debt. And so in a sense, I'm like, yeah, it's okay. It's great. If that's what helped me to get through that, that's wonderful. So I think it's a weird thing, because at times it can be quite a helpful thing. If it's what's giving you the drive, if it's a story that gives you the meaning to kind of follow through on that. Because I think sometimes without that, I don't know about you, I don't follow through on half. I mean, I know I should be running and working out and eating better. Guess what? I don't do. But you know what? If I genuinely believe God had told me at the beginning of the year, Phil, I want you to do this because I believe you're going to run a marathon and, pull a truck by the end of the year, I'd have probably stuck to it much more. I don't know. And so,
are you married?
Yeah. So maybe my wife should just tell me to get married running. She's too kind.
If I'm honest, that's the only. My wife is like the only reason why I'm disciplined in anything.
No, it's probably quite close to me as well. Yeah.
But it's interesting they brought Dave Ramsey because, so if I can just move ahead just a couple months in my story, I had that business, right? And I was expecting, because I had some money saved up for taxes, as I should, and everything else like that. We were hit with a $4,000 tax bill, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm like, we have like $2,000 in our account right now. And conveniently enough, we had just started taking Financial Peace University, taught by Dave Ramsey. God provided again. Man, imagine this. And I just got this job so we can actually pay off this debt. Oh man, this is great. And so I actually talked with my tax guy. It turns out he kind of messed a couple things up. And so now instead of 4,000, it's actually only 2,000. And guess how much money we had in our account? $2,000.
Wow.
God's amazing. This is so great. And my wife, she's like, praise God. Like, she never does that. Even as a Christian, she would never do that. She did that.
Everyone does that when you just realize you saved $2,000.
Exactly. And we
Even
were
the atheists are praising God at saving $2,000. Let's face it.
Right. But Dave Ramsey, I mean, I actually I replied to myself on that post. I'm like, I'm just kind of joking in a way because Dave Ramsey did actually help us out a lot. He did. We actually taught financial peace at our church. My wife still does the envelope system. I highly recommend it. You know, that we don't do the tithe thing anymore, but I've also had tithe for the last 25 years of my life. So I'm not doing that anymore.
Right. Yeah. You paid into that system.
A little bit.
Yeah. No, I've been involved in helping people, you know, in their finances and different things like that. And Dave Ramsey's stuff to me is absolutely invaluable. I don't like his theology. Obviously, that's something that I don't click with. And so I adapt different components, or I say like, hey, like generosity is a great component. Like that doesn't look like you mandating having to give 10% of your salary to a church or anything, but figure out what can you budget to then be generous with, and, you know, whatever. And if you decide, actually, I'm going to make sure that 4% of my salary goes to giving away to stuff, and I'll find a single mom that needs some help with rent, or I'll buy someone some groceries in front of me in the queue when they don't have enough to pay for their groceries and they're asking if they can put back some stuff, I'll buy that, or whatever. Like teaching people some of these like incredible ways to see money as a gift, as an opportunity to bless the world and make the world a better place. A very Christian world, bless. But I think, like, you know, these things are wonderful, and I think it's so easy for us to approach them so black and white, right? And to go, oh, Dave Ramsey, Christian, worst thing ever. And it's like, no, actually, the vast majority of what he's teaching has got nothing to do with Christianity. It's about money. It's about practicality. It's about helping people that are in dire straits. I mean, his stories, I guess because it's American as well, like you guys do poverty like no one else, because of the lack of safety nets. I've said this frequently, the worst poverty I've seen in my travels in the world has been in America, in California, believe it or not. And it's because there just isn't safety nets for some people. Some people just genuinely go through the rock bottom. And so reading Dave's stories, I'm like, I just can't even fathom the debt that people get into, the problems that people have, the issues they suddenly face of like, gosh, I'm going bankrupt because I can't pay for a hospital bill, or, you know, I'm going to just end up on the streets because there's no housing for me, or things like that. And I'm just like, wow, like someone like Dave being able to help people out of that situation into a situation where they're now a homeowner and they're whatever, they own a car outright or whatever it is, which might seem really simple to a lot of people, right? But to a good portion of people, that's a huge thing. That's like a life goal. You know what I mean? Like, that's amazing. So yeah, I mean, it's just not black and white. It just isn't, is it?
There's a very, I'm not sure how specific it is just to America, but I know especially within America and politics, religion, there's a huge lack of nuance, as Sam Harris likes to say, and we are unable to look at things with a nuanced perspective, with that multifaceted perspective. And it's either black or white. It's either this or that. It's very binary. And the more I've grown as a person, it's like, oh, good Lord, like it's anything but that. And I trying to look at things so nuanced to where the left or right, the one way or other perspective, I can't even proceed to step into that conversation just because the person and me are so far apart. Like we're not really going to get anywhere. And that's kind of frustrating for me. And so when I try to tell people about my deconversion, like even just sharing a story, it's like, I'm sure any Christian listening to me is like, well, isn't that enough evidence for God? Like how could you say you're an atheist now? I'm like, well, things happen, shit happens. Okay. And we look at things from a nuanced perspective. It shows you that there's more options than being atheist or Christian, theist or atheist. like God is great. Like she's a perfect example of, hey, guess what? Evangelical Christianity is not the only answer to theism. Like,
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that is I mean, it's endemic in our society, is this either or. I mean, even when you look at something as simple as politics, the fact that we have in most societies on the whole as well, like just like two main parties, and you've got maybe some other parties or maybe other options, but they're considered like wasted votes because of the way the voting system is literally an either or and all or nothing. There's not like weighting or any, and the whole system is built by the two parties really usually. But it's like, okay, politics, how to run a country. Well, okay, boil that down just into one tiny segment. Let's look at the economy, or let's look at education, or let's look at, you know, how to collect tax and, you know, distribute that. Like all these different components, literally just one area probably has tens, hundreds of thousands of policies shaping it. And in that, you will find a myriad of different opinions on how to do it. Right? Any expert in any one field of education or something, you'll find tons and tons of opinions. But we expect that the Republicans over here, the Democrats over here, or in Labor and Conservative, or whichever country you're in, there'll be a couple of parties. We expect them to go, okay, I've got a position, and it's entirely, we've mapped out all 10 million policies, and we've got them all right. And then over there, they've got all 10 million policies completely wrong, right? I mean, that's how we've somehow managed to sum it up. And of course, we don't really think about that. We don't. We just go, oh, are they for or against abortion, or whatever the big topic for us is. We all kind of boil it down to 5, 10, 2, 1 policy. But if we actually stop and think about it, go, whoa, that's a lot of policies. We should probably just talk about these things and just see where different people are at, and then maybe form our own opinions and maybe give and take and recognize there's probably some compromise that's going to have to happen here or there. You can maybe have that in this policy if I really want this policy to shift this way. Like that's a realistic component of how it all is going to work. But our whole society is built over, no, I'm right, they're wrong. Like, and my group is right and every other group is wrong. It's back to that kind of Christian concept, right? Of like, we talk about like
certainty.
How many denominations, right? You're looking online and you're like, well, I'm right, and I've got this church that's right. I'll have a look and see if there's any other churches. God, every single church in 30 miles is wrong. At some point, you should probably be going, maybe I'm also wrong. And maybe actually no one's right. And maybe we all could learn something. But we don't, right? We do just go, well, screw these stupid idiots for 30-mile radius. Gosh, I guess I'm going to have to look at 50-mile radius. Or, you know, like, we just can't possibly conceive that it's not just this black and white dualistic approach. And something like politics is just, it makes it even more laughable because it's such a complicated kind of, you know, running an entire nation. Are you kidding me? Like that one person or one group has kind of like got the perfect system completely. And we've let those people lead, right? Democrats and Republicans have led before. And guess what? It's been shit, right? It might have been a bit better or a bit worse or whatever, but on the whole, it wasn't a perfect system. They definitely did not have every policy down, right? Because we didn't suddenly have this utopia that just like went on forever. So yeah, it just fascinates me how we do it. We do it in religion, we do it in politics, we do it in all these kind of things. Yeah. Are you a big fan of Sam Harris? You mentioned like his kind of nuanced kind of approach and how he talks.
Yeah, I am. Sam Harris, he was one of the dominoes in my deconversion. He was probably one of the primary ones, inadvertently so, but he definitely was. I want to say that Trump actually probably was the first domino before.
Oh wow!
So it's kind of interesting. Like I try to figure out when did I actually start deconverting, and I honestly think I have to look back at when I first left the cult church, and when my previous church, the Calvary Chapel Church, taught me like there's closed issues and there's open hand issues. That grew me spiritually, I believe. But it's kind of like it's kind of like a bubble. You just get bigger, bigger, bigger. Then eventually just kind of evaporates and explodes. Like I think that is probably a pretty good analogy to where I was. And so I'm not sure that makes sense, but yeah. So Sam Harris definitely had an effect. Joe Rogan had a big impact on me because so this is work had a big impact on me. I'm usually working for small time businesses with one or two people working for myself. I don't really work with a lot of people. And so I had an office with a bunch of other people. We start chit-chatting. We talk about different things. I learned that non-Christians aren't all horrible when
They're
you get
not
to know
all
them,
evil
even
and
even 40
planning the
hours a
death of
week.
every Christian. And
Right. Like even when you get to know them 40 hours a week, there is this one gal. She was pretty cool. Like she was a sorority girl from one of the, I think she was a Gator, University of Florida. I think that's Gators. I'm sorry, I don't keep up with colleges and sports. But she loved Taylor Swift and all she was a fun loving, straight out of college lady, and I thought she was a hoot, and she was incredibly reasonable. And she kind of like, we were not close, okay, but we did talk, we did some of the work stuff, and I'm like, wow, okay, this is what a normal person looks like. Like, this is great. And I would constantly, like, I'm a very judgy person. I'm very critical of myself. I'm critical of others. I'm working on that, okay, but I'm very visual. I analyze things, I observe things, and I'm like, I see this person here and I see me. And I'm like, it is really easy for me to see all my flaws and all the things that I'm doing wrong. And then I'm starting to realize, like, wow, a lot of my religious beliefs aren't necessarily religious beliefs. They're just me being an asshole. I need to work on that.
That's funny. That's really funny.
And now, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, which came first, the religion or the asshole? Like, I'm not really sure what was it, because I was an asshole I was drawn into a cult, or did the cult make the asshole? Like, I don't know. I truly don't know. It was probably a little bit of both.
Yeah. A bit of symbiotic relationship, right?
Yeah.
Both benefited from each other.
Right.
No, I agree. There's definitely components of faith that attract certain personalities that are very great and wonderful. It attracts a lot of like very altruistic kind of personalities and things like that, of course, but it also can really attract very narcissistic people, kind of sociopathic kind of things like that. So, it's both sides of that. But they can also flourish, those kind of personality, right? You look at what we're talking about with American Christianity, and it being very driven by that undercurrent of an American exceptionalism, individualism, kind of some of those things that have made America great, but also in the wrong hands sometimes made America what it's the worst at as well. It's those kind of double-edged swords. And it's the same with religion, right? It can be this double-edged sword in the wrong hands, in the wrong perspective, with the wrong person, whether you were the wrong person going in or whether you were mentored through the wrong person or whatever. It doesn't help. It kind of fans the flames of some of the worst in us, like judgmentalism and all that stuff. I mean, we're naturally wired to judge. That's just part of our ego, and we're trying to devolve ourselves of that and learn to kind of let go and stop telling these stories about other people and how they perceive the world, and we don't actually know what's going on in their heads. And but religion really loves that sometimes and goes, how about we do that more? How about we really go all in on that judging people? Just like, yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
And I think that's what was happened to me, to be quite honest. Like, I went to, after we've been at the church for a couple of years, my wife actually got a job at the same corporation I work at. In fact, she's already been promoted 3 times. I'm still in the same place that I've been the entire time.
Outshining.
So well, she's also got a master's degree, and they really like that. So
that'll do it. Yeah.
Well,
apparently they like people related as well. Like, we talk about church nepotism, but this company sounds like nepotism central, right?
I mean, she is an insanely focused person. Like, she does not get distracted. Like, she can knock out like these 1,000-page books in no time.
Don't you hate those people?
So she can literally read 100 pages before I can read 10.
I'm so envious.
It's ridiculous. And like, she is so intelligent and just very disciplined and focused. Like, it's and honestly, I think she did save one of the projects that she was working on. Like, if it was not for her, they probably would have fell behind deadlines. And so they have very good reason for wanting to keep her around.
No, absolutely. I bet.
Yeah. But it was, as far as like that first push on the domino effect on my deconstruction, like, it was probably most evident during the 2016 election. And that was when I had already drifted really far apart from my cult church. But at that point, I had already kind of like, yeah, they're crazy. Like
Mm.
they're the anomaly in the data. So we're just going to cut them out to make the results a little bit more accurate. That's a good scientific example there.
Yeah.
And I was when Trump was finally the candidate, I'm like, well, shit, I don't know who I'm voting for. I probably am going to vote Libertarian again because I voted Libertarian last time. I actually knew, for those who don't know, Gary Johnson. I actually met him a couple of different times. I was his photographer when he was up in Ohio, and I got to have a couple beers with him and his VP and stuff. So I was very close into politics. Like it was very important to me. And when Trump was the candidate, I'm like, wow, this is going to be really interesting. I'm kind of curious to see how the church is going to respond to this.
Mm.
And then, like, I was shocked. Like, I was legitimately shocked to see how much the church was just foaming at the mouth over Trump. And like, this is not making any sense. Like, what is happening?
Mm.
What is happening? And so it was the church moved very far away from where I was, and where I thought I aligned with the church as far as now being very pro-humanitarian. Like during the whole refugee crisis, I rubbed a lot of shoulders with a lot of people, and I'm telling Christians like, hey, Paul freaking said our citizenship is in heaven. We're not supposed to consider ourselves Americans or Mexicans, wherever. We are citizens of heaven. And our job is to share the gospel with all people, regardless, no matter what. And that pissed off a lot of conservative evangelicals.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
and just some of the horrible things that are being said about refugees and people trying to flee persecution, and that was rough. And then when Trump did become president, I was realizing really quick that something is amiss here. I am now that liberal Christian.
Yeah. But it's a huge. Have you? Did you watch? Kevin Miller did a documentary called JES USA.
No, I never heard
it's
that.
about the conflation of American culture and Christianity, and this unique thing that is American Christianity. It's such a weird thing, like for Christians around the world, that maybe not so much maybe places that have been like saved by America, Christians, or maybe missionary cultures, but for the rest of the Christianity kind of watching on, it is a bit of a head scratcher sometimes. Like most of Europe watching America like get really excited about Trump, going, all right, I get that you guys are really into that abortion bit, and that is like the be all and end all, and we get it. Like that's how you're seeing things, framing things. You think it's, you think millions of babies are dying every year. We'd be pissed off if we thought millions of babies are dying every year as well. I get it. But you seem to be turning pretty hard blind eye on a lot of things here over that one issue. Like, I feel like you could have found someone else that didn't like abortion. Anyone else, really. Any other human probably would have been a pretty good candidate. But like, and so for people outside of the American culture, that was like, whoa, like America are really going hard this time. Like, because we always kind of laugh at some of the candidates that kind of come up on some level. They're just kind of caricatures in a lot of ways at times. I remember I lived in America for a couple of elections, and just watching, I remember my church, it was the year it was Romney versus Obama, and my church, Romney's the Mormon, isn't he? Yeah. And they literally were like, yeah, like there's a good Christian candidate finally. We don't have this like crazy non-Christian Obama. And I'm like, he's pretty he's pretty strong. He says he goes to church. He's like quite clear. He believes in God. Like he's, whatever your belief about what that means, but he's certainly said what he believes, and there's no real evidence to say that he's not. And then I'm like, and you're advocating a Mormon. I'm like, Christians don't usually like Mormons. In my experience, Christians are really not pro-Mormon, but now they're like, this guy's God's person. He's a good, godly Christian man. And I'm like, you had to literally get what you have been calling a cult for decades. You had to incorporate an entire cult into your group to allow you to vote. Not really for this guy, but actually against someone else. Like, and I'm watching this like mental gymnastics that an entire movement's doing. I know lots of Christians voted for Obama, and lots of Christians voted for Romney, or whatever, different people. But watching this one group that I was involved with do that, and just having the luxury of being a bit outside of it and going, wow, they can't see they're doing this. They can't see that they have embraced someone that they would have considered like a part of a cult. And it's the same deal with Trump. Like, it's like when you go in there and you're in that, you're like, you guys, you can't even, you're so in cognitive dissonance that you can't even acknowledge this guy's joking about abusing women or whatever, right? I mean, and it's a fascinating component. But that must have been going on before. I mean, there have been candidates before where you're like, that's not particularly a Christian candidate, but it's the Christian candidate. But that wasn't enough for you. What was it about Trump that like that was a big thing where you were like, whoa, we've kind of crossed the line here of who we're saying is the Christian candidate or God's choice or whatever language was there?
Well, Obama was the Antichrist, so that's an important factor.
Yeah, and I mean, and to be fair, like you're a libertarian, right? I get that. I've had libertarians come on the show, and we talked about that. And I'm quite a big fan of a lot of libertarian kind of positions. So I understand that even as a libertarian, Obama's still like the Antichrist at some level, just maybe on a more political level. Like, but it's big government. It's whatever. It's a lot of things. So.
Right. I and just I wouldn't call myself a libertarian right now. I really wouldn't. I've actually kind of, I don't know where the hell I am, to be quite honest with you.
The problem is nuance, man. You don't fit in any boxes anymore.
I don't. I'm definitely a moderate. I lean left. I don't think it's fair to say that I lean left because I don't think having equality for all is a liberal radical idea, but apparently in America it is. I see the good that government can do for different social aspects, and great. I'm all for that. The libertarian would say, nope, as limited government as possible. And I'm like, I don't think that's the right answer. Clearly, some private companies are good at certain things. SpaceX, fantastic, awesome corporation, doing amazing stuff. Blackwater, maybe not.
That's
okay,
a great example. Yeah, that's hilarious. Well, and then you get into the thing of like, how far can we even disintegrate government and Blackwater anyway at this point? So like, what even is government and what is a private entity? It's a mess. It is a mess. But yeah, okay. So sorry, but to rewind, so like, but there was something in like the church's embracing of Trump that really was like just a kind of screeching brakes, like, whoa, head out of the sand suddenly of like something is going on that I haven't seen before or something.
I mean, honestly, he's not a good human being. If as an atheist, if I can prescribe any sort of morality that is, objective, like I don't think because I don't subscribe to that, but based upon Christians' own morality, there is no way to justify the things that he says. And so conveniently enough, Christians now are like, well, we're not electing a pastor. We're electing a strong leader. And I'm like, great, you're electing a pastor or a president who wants to grab women by their pussies. Fantastic. That sounds like an awesome person that we want to have to be president. And I know that statement gets overused a lot, but it's the truth. Like, he literally said it. He did not apologize for it, as far as I know. And he's like, yeah, I said that. What are you going to do? And this is the same guy who says, I can literally shoot a person in the street and I'll still be president. And I fully believe he is accurate in that statement. And that should be terrifying. And I think that we're seeing that played out with the whole Black Lives thing, where we are literally having police officers, murder Black people. And they're turning a blind eye to it. They're like, well, that's wrong. Okay, but what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's insanely frustrating. I think maybe just like the older I get, the more enlightened I become. I don't know if it's that or not, but I knew Trump was not a person who has humanity's best interests. Yeah. And I think that was when I was starting to become more of a humanist. That was when my Christianity, my humanist perspectives were starting to mingle quite a bit. Because I also went to Peru on my first actual missions trip. That was a whole nother can of worms. And it's one thing to to be in a combat zone while I was in Iraq and see people living life when you're the one liberating them. But when you're the one there being the white savior, trying to help people with the means of just getting them to become Christians, it was that stark contrast. Because back to 2009, I was in Iraq, and I was in a hospital that we had, and it was a children's hospital, and there were a brother and a sister, and we bombed them.
Wow.
And let's just say that they are not going to have a normal life as much as a normal Iraqi child could have.
Yeah.
And, that's on us. That was completely on us. And that will always haunt me, knowing that, at least when it comes to like pro-life situations, you cannot say that you're pro-life and look at the eyes of those children and still support a lot of things that evangelical Christian conservatives support. Now, it's a very broad general statement, and I realize that, but I'm referring straightly back to myself, and I'm looking at these two children. One was a 10-year-old girl, and one was a 5-year-old boy, and we blew them literally to hell. Luckily, they were alive. What the fuck do you do with that? And of course, me at the time, like, oh, we're helping these kids. This is great. And of course, I took the selfie with the kids. Like, oh my gosh, like it's horrible. And I remember what the girl said. She actually, this 10-year-old knew a little bit of English, and she tried to say, "We know you're the good guys." Wow. Oh.
It's just so goes back to this black and white good guy bad guy, right?
Yeah,
because it's just not that simple, right? It is it's mess trying to establish, but again, we like the nice, simple, clear cut, and if we can be the good guy, oh thank God, that was a weight off my chest. So anyway, sorry, you were about to keep going.
And so you fast forward to 2018, 17, I can't remember when I went to Peru. And same thing, like only this time I was in the Christian army, and I led half a dozen people to Christ. I even baptized one myself. So again, Christians who want to say I wasn't a Christian, you want to know them by their fruit. Hey, I've literally
how many people you saved?
I've saved over 100. How about you? I haven't baptized one of them. I discipled dozens of men myself. Anyway, sorry. Way to ruin that moment there, Will. But and I realized that just how religious Christianity was being, and how much of a detriment that Christianity was being. Yeah, I saved some souls, but what of it? Is we left, we packed up, and that was it. We taught them some English. Great. And it was really kind of concerning because they were obsessed with Western civilization. Like they wanted to be like America. And of course, like a lot of these people were here at that camp that we were doing because clearly you had to be a Christian to be American. Whoa, like that was terrifying for me. I'm like, no, and they're saying, well, can't we be like Trump, or can we be like this person and still be a Christian? I'm like, oh my gosh, where are you getting this information from? Like they were equating like Hollywood and politics to Christianity. Like, so it wasn't even so much that they were wanting to be a Christian, they were wanting to be American. And I had to deconstruct a lot of my shit real quick in a quick few minutes there to try to help deconstruct. I'm like, no. Christian, you can be Peruvian and still be Christian, please.
But you're taking away the part they want. They're like, okay, so can I become an American and not Christian? Because that's the best option.
Right. And there was, and I don't want to like downplay that the Peruvians were like these lost culture people. No, that's stupid. They're very intelligent. They're just as intelligent as Americans. Like but a lot of them are in poverty, and of course the education system with the poverty levels, we were working with a lot of people who were undereducated. There were a lot of educated people there too, and they were actually quite helpful in trying to help the missionaries kind of unravel some of that bullshit. And talking about, you think about Joe, I can't remember her last name, but she's really big on decolonization. Yes. When I couldn't quite put my finger on how wrong that mission trip was until I found her account. And I'm like, oh, good God, this is what I was guilty of. This is it. This is it.
her
And yeah.
account, man, just like, it gets me every time. Every time I click on it, I kind of brace. Do you know what I mean? Because I am like, I'm a white guy. I have a lot of white fragility to bring to the table. I have a lot of white supremacy to bring to the table. I've been privileged in my upbringing in a whole host of ways. Like, you know, I've got a whole stack of privilege. And I've got a few elements that kind of notch me down the list, but I'm doing very well. And every time I click on it, I'm reminded of it, and I'm shown, hey, this is some of the ways that some of that stuff might be ingrained in you still, and you might still be actively benefiting at the expense of someone else, or you might still be perpetrating things that make the world a worse place. And I am so drawn to it because it's so good for me, and it's so healthy, and it's so important. But it's so scary because no one wants to, you know, have that mirror held up and go, oh, there's a monster looking back in some ways, right? Not that we're all evil, terrible, but that's just part of our culture and the systemic elements that we've been grown up in. And, you know, it's not to say that anyone's white's evil, but if you've been grown up white, you've probably grown up in a system that has allowed you to benefit and oppress other people and things like that. But I love her account in this pain, this like love-hate dynamic where I absolutely love it, but I also like hate the work it forces me into. But I love the work it forces. It's just amazing.
That's
exactly
right.
There was a person I was thinking of as you were telling that story. I'm like, gosh, Joe Lumen would love to have a magnifying glass on that trip. You know what I mean? Like, just like, what's going on here?
Dude, I would have she would be beating crap out of me like every single second. I'm like, I didn't know it, and I thought I was doing good.
Yeah.
As everyone who goes on mission trips thinks that they're actually doing good. Okay, let's separate the whatever you call it, the bullshit. Like, people have good intentions when they go on a mission trip.
Absolutely.
Okay?
And she'd be the first to say that as well. You know, she highlights the system, she pushes it. And if you're quick to go, oh yeah, there is a problem out there. So like, you know, I'm not saying that like I click on it going, oh gosh, she's out to get me. That's never her intent. I've had her on the show and had great chats with her. Like, but it's still scary to have like, oh, you're attacking. It's like Christianity, right? You attack the system, you feel attacked as one of the people within the system. Anyway, sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and so like what do I do when I go to an entire, basically an entire county or an entire city in Peru, where they have very little running water, no electricity, and somehow these people survive, and like I don't get it. I could not comprehend it, and here they are worshiping, you know, singing white American Christian songs, you know, and it's just heartbreaking. Of course, I did the white savior picture with me and all the children doing Sunday school with the kids. Oh my gosh! Like, anyways, so that was the humanitarian leap for me, and that was when I think I hit like my peak spiritual maturity, when I realized when I shedded a lot of the political and religious bullshit from Christianity to actually being an effective Christian, saying, no, there are things that Jesus taught that the church directly works against, and we can see that actively. And I don't really care what other Christians say. I'm going to do what Jesus taught. Now, in the background, my wife, while I was on that mission trip, God failed her because she has separation anxiety. And that was a big part of her deconstruction. And after that, she was never the same after that trip again. She was almost suicidal. She dealt with a lot of crap. People were supposed to stay with her. Other Christians were supposed to stay with her and stay the night with her. A lot of our friends fell through on that, and she was there alone because she dealt with that separation anxiety from when I was in Iraq. So we got married when I was on leave in Iraq, by the way. Like, so literally our last 6 months of our engagement, the first 6 months of our marriage, I was gone. Yeah, exactly. And of course, I went on this mission trip because to become a pastor at our church, you had to go on at least one mission trip. So I am fulfilling God's duty, and I felt God calling to go on this mission trip. And so being the good wife that she was, she's like, I am going to trust God to support me on this despite these issues. And she was very proactive. She got these ladies to come with her and stay with her. And it went to shit. Like every night I was calling my wife and she was in tears and I just don't know what to say while I'm also trying to do all this mission work stuff.
Right. I mean, you're trapped in Peru, right? You barely have running water, never mind a way to get back and make it better. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was nuts. And so she'd done some biblical counseling after that and tried to be in some support groups. And I went on, so she was struggling and there wasn't a whole lot I could do as a husband. But some of the things that I personally wanted to do was I wanted to figure out who Jesus was. And I wanted to have that real personal relationship, not with just my idea of who Jesus was, but who actually Jesus is. My idea of inerrancy, biblical inerrancy, had started to dwindle already a little bit, even though I'll still read my Bible every single day.
Sure.
And
why was that starting to dwindle? What caused you to start to kind of question that and not hold that up?
Some of the things that was being taught at our church, and they would say, listen, like, you know, it's the Bible. So it was kind of like doublespeak. They would say like the Bible is the mind of God. Is it perfect? It was maybe most of the time, but it's still the mind of God. I'm like, all right, sure, whatever, sounds good. Like, I don't know how that works if God's perfect, but whatever, you know, you got the human element that's mixed in there.
Sure.
And so I guess so this is 2020, so 2019. So Christmas 2018, I had already have gotten a lot of distance between me and a lot of Christians. I was still being groomed up to be a pastor at our church. Then I realized personally that I was dealing with a lot of spiritual issues. And there was a lot of things that the church did and supported that I didn't think was exactly biblical, not just like our specific church, but like the church at large. And I'm like, sure, I need to figure out if this is something that I can actually support, because they have a 2-year program for people who want to become pastors and leaders in the church. And I already done all the other dozen leadership courses. Like I had checked every box. Like I was ready to go. Like if I would have done it, unless I would have said that Jesus is not real or something like that, then they would have allowed me into the program. Like I was a shoo-in essentially, because I was supposed to. I almost got in last time. I'd already been in church for 6 months, but this time around, I didn't even put in an interview, and a lot of people were kind of concerned about that. Especially the one of the main pastors for the men's ministry that was kind of grooming me up a little bit. He's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Well, I'm still figuring out some stuff. Yeah, don't worry. God will probably still be here for the next round of pastoral training."
That's all you do.
So yeah. So I had listened to a lot of Joe Rogan. I like Joe Rogan, even as a Christian, kind of woo-woo dude. I still think he's a little bit of a woo-woo dude, but I can appreciate the man's honesty. He will have anyone on there. He has everyone of all sorts of walks of life on there, and you know, I can respect him for that. I don't have to agree with everything he says and does without respecting the fact that he's got transparency.
Yeah. And no, I like him for the same reasons. I like that he'll have someone, you put these dualistic camps, he'll have them all. You know, he's like, oh, they're radically right? Cool, get them on. They're radically left? Stick them on. Let's have a chat. And he doesn't, he pushes back a bit on different people at times, but generally speaking, even then it's not him attacking them. It's like I had a guest like a few months ago and they said, actually, it's like this. How would you respond to that? And still just gives them space to explore. And it's a long form. So one of the reasons I do a long form chat is because of people like Joe Rogan, Pete Holmes, people that do longer ones. And I'm like, I love this. You can't have someone on for too long and think, oh, I hate this person. I go out of my way to find people on Joe Rogan that I really don't like. And there's quite a few. I don't like a lot of people apparently. And after you listen to it for 3 hours, with one exception, I'm like, this is a pretty decent guy actually, just doing his thing, and he just believes the way he is. I think he believes wrong, but I can't like fault him as a bad human or anything anymore.
Well, let me guess, is the one person Alex Jones?
Yes, my God. Yes. I tried so hard. I was like, well, I'm gonna try, and I'm like, dang, this guy is just not doing himself any favors. The amount of times Joe interrupts him and goes like, Alec, look, I hear what you're saying. I just think maybe if we notched it down, we got a little bit less angry about like just totally side project and maybe like worked on. No, he was just crazy.
Let's just pause on this
crazy.
for a second. Let's just pause it. Oh, he's literally had over 1,000 people be interviewed on his show.
Over 1,500 people now, right? And you immediately know the one person.
The one person. That is telling. That is telling.
Alex Jones is a special type of human. And oh gosh, I dream of having people like Alex Jones on there. I dream of having like John Piper on here and just asking questions and going, have you ever had doubts? Like, come on, just be honest. Like, you ever had doubts? I mean, no one's going to watch this. Like 1,000 people are going to see this. None of your friends, none of your people are going to see this. You ever have any questions? Like, how do you deal with that? Do you ever deal with existential dread? I mean, they would just never have that conversation. The problem is how to get those people on. But I love the idea. I love Joe, and I love the way he does that. Anyway, keep going. So
I know you like the long form. I know you usually cap it about 2 hours. So I'm going to try to squeeze in like the whole last year of my craziness.
Oh gosh. We can go a little over if you need. So I've always got loads of time. So
okay, fantastic.
I want to make sure we don't steal your day if you've got if you need to be.
Tact and conciseness is not one of my strong suits. So
I was
definitely bred to be a pastor.
Yeah.
And so listening to Joe Rogan, leads you to a lot of people, including Sam Harris. Like, hey, Sam Harris, this guy seems pretty cool. Like, he talks a lot about skepticism and things like that. And, he seems to be a pretty intelligent dude. Like, I like intelligence, so let's check him out. I'm listening to one of Sam Harris's podcasts. He has a guy on there who's an expert on the Bible. I'm like, oh, fantastic. This should be really interesting. I'm going to check this guy out. Fucking Bart Ehrman. Fantastic.
I knew you were going to say Bart
Ehrman. Enter Ehrman.
Amazing.
To say, I'm not going to hide it. I am an Ehrman fanboy. There's no. I
love Ehrman.
Ehrman. I'm not sure which one it is. It's funny because I've heard people introduce him both ways, and he doesn't correct him either way. I think he might just get. When
I get him on this podcast, and I said when, not if, I'm going to do it. When I get him, I'm just not going to at all introduce. I'll just be like, and this is Bart. Like, I don't know.
People's done that though.
I've noticed that there's multiple ways people have said it, and it just seems to like glide in.
Yeah.
So who knows?
So that's funny. And then all of a sudden he started saying all these things. I'm like, wait, what? No, that's not true. That's bullshit. What? No. So he started saying all these things. And again, I had already kind of caught on to a couple things just by doing it. Because again, I've been studying the Bible for 3 years straight, just doing my own personal devos. And I'm like, wait a second. Like, I would say things like, the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says this. Like, what do I do here? And in fact, I can't remember when I started listening to Aaron the first time. But I do remember reading about, I don't know what it was about the ascension, the ascension of Christ. And it was at an Easter service. And my wife was very much doubting. And that was really pulling on me. And
how were you feeling with that? With the fact that your wife was kind of going through a bit more of a deconstruction, maybe a little ahead of schedule for where you were at? Like, was hard for you? Like, I mean, that's hard for a lot of good kind of Bible-believing Christians. Their partners maybe not in the same place anymore. Like, that's right. That's a lot.
It was a lot. I knew a lot of Christian males. Their wife had peaced out, and they were still doing the whole Christian thing with their wife not being a Christian anymore. I'm like, well, I guess that's going to be me then. Wow. It sucks, but
which is funny because the norm is usually the other way around, right? Like, how many churches are full of like women that haven't got their husbands with them? Because
I don't know. I don't know the statistics. Maybe it's just because I'm not as close as many females, but I do know a lot of guys who had to deal with that. So that was kind of rough. And go figure. My wife is honestly a little bit more wittier and has a few more synapses firing a little faster than I do. So I'm not surprised that she was ahead of the curve on me on this. But I come to terms with it, and it was painful. I loved hearing my wife sing and worship. That's one of the things that I loved about her. And so many times we were going to church and she just would stand up and she wouldn't sing. And it was heartbreaking. It was really painful. And so finally I asked her, do you want to go to an Easter service? And she was like, yeah, I'll go. I'm like, fantastic. This is great. And I had just recently read about the ascension of Jesus. And I also had found out about the story of Romulus and a couple other people who have supposedly ascended into heaven. And I'm reading the end of Luke here, and I'm like, this is strange. This is not in any other gospel. Why is this not in any other gospel? That is kind of concerning.
Right.
And that's kind of a big thing. And where did Luke get this information? Because he wasn't a disciple. He's hearing this secondhand. And I literally wrote my Bible here. I'm gonna pull it up here real quick.
Go for it. Yeah.
Actually, because
you're an atheist with a Bible to hand. I like that.
It's never left my desk. And I like to take a picture of it, or I like to look at it, because if I had to really point to where I really started going downhill really fast, it was that point right there. And I'm just kind of pointing.
Wow.
To the ascension.
I love it.
Do I believe that? And if that is bullshit, fuck.
Yeah.
Like that is literally a spiritually a mind fuck. I know I've been cussing on here, so I apologize.
No, you're fine. You can cuss as much as you want on this. So.
Still hates cussing. She really does.
Really? That's fine.
It's
well, I'm
funny
Scottish, so I cuss as, like, that's my bread and butter.
Yeah. It's funny because like she has like this kind of like subjective rule. She's like, cussing's fine as long as it's a suitable reason to cuss. And so every now and then I'll hear something or hear someone cuss, I'll be like, was that a good reason? So I'm trying to figure out when it's acceptable for me to or not. That's so funny. Like it's like when Disney was closed for 3 or 4 months, like because we're Disney addicts. Stephanie was like, I fucking want Disney to open. I'm like, oh. She's like, that was acceptable. A good reason. Okay.
That's funny. Well, I don't need much reason, to be honest. Yeah, I end up cussing quite a lot.
So I remember being it wasn't an Easter service. It was the Palm Sunday service, and I remember really struggling. I'm having doubts. I have never had doubts. Never.
Wow.
That was scary. And the next week I was fine. The next week for the actual Resurrection Sunday, Easter Sunday, I was good. Yeah.
Had you kind of come to terms? Have you answered it for yourself, or did you just kind of like let's shove that back down there and just not look at it? Like, how did you feel like you came to a place where like by the next week you were like, yeah, okay, back to church, I'm good, I don't mind, I'm not too worried, because that's a big like crisis.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Well, I guess it's normal for people to doubt, right? And like maybe it just took me 25 years to finally start doubting something. Like, okay, well, this is normal. It's okay to doubt. Our pastor has this thing called saying, doubt your doubts. That's some good kind of distance or confirmation. But either way, I can't remember. It's not healthy. Like,
it works though. It works really well to keep people going.
But I think it was that specifically that I'm like, I want to figure out more about this. And that's when I started learning about Ehrman, and I would, and then he had this story, and it's a great story. And he was in Bible college when he was still an evangelical Christian, and his professor, he would tell you this exact same story. He does it quite a few times too. So I'm going to repeat it here because it's effective. His professor is like, I can't remember what the question was about. And so it seemed like it was like a seeming contradiction or something that was not correct. And so Ehrman had like this strong, incredibly multi-page rebuttal to this one simple question. And he got in on it. And then, but the professor wrote a little note, hey, this is great. But wouldn't it be simpler to say that maybe Mark was just wrong? Oh, shit. Could Mark be wrong? Is that possible? Wow, that was that for me. I'm like, no, it's the word of God. He can't be wrong. Yeah. Then I remember about the ascension. I'm like, oh, could have Luke have been wrong? And then I'm like, oh my gosh, Mark wasn't an eyewitness either. Oh shit, he's also our earliest gospel. Oh crap! Like it was like all of a sudden, like this huge avalanche just happened.
Wow.
And I'm like, let's calm down, let's breathe. And so, being a good skeptic, I watched a lot of debates with Ehrman. In fact, I didn't even do that. I paused it. I could not listen to that podcast anymore. I paused it, and I'm like, I need to listen to a Christian's perspective on this. And so I found a guy named Dr. So for Christians listening who think that Ehrman brought me down and he was like the the sole winner of why I no longer believe that the Bible is inerrant, it was actually not Ehrman. It was a Christian, and that was Dr. Daniel Wallace. And I'm like, yes, this is like a 2-hour-long lecture. He's a Bible expert. Textual Craig, this is going to be fantastic. And he has this really long intro about all these manuscripts and how it's all wonderful and it's like 99.9% correct. I'm like, what's he mean by that? Well, whatever, doesn't matter. I'm sure he'll explain it. And then he says, is the Bible right? Absolutely. Is it the mind of God? Absolutely not. I'm like, what? What? And my heart just sank. And then it was terrifying for me to realize how much of my faith hinged on basically the Bible being true.
Yeah.
And that was rough. And then of course Stephanie's watching it with me, my wife. And I asked her how she's been doing spiritually, and she's like, well, this stuff sure isn't helping.
That's so funny. Wow.
So I watched all of Bart Ehrman's great courses. Yale University has some open courses, and I learned the secular version of the biblical history, one from Christine Haynes. She taught the Old Testament.
Fantastic course, yeah.
I love it. Every Christian needs to take that course. There's no question about it. It's free. If you can listen to an hour-long sermon once a week, you can listen to one of these lectures once a week and get through it in a year. Absolutely necessary, and it will solve so much ignorance.
Yeah. And
then I got to listen to Dale Martin, who actually used Bart Ehrman's textbook in that class, which I thought was hilarious. And the more I learn about the Bible, the more I realize so much of what I believe is based upon what Scripture tells me. Mm. And so then I was quickly trying to rely on apologetics as far as Christians debating atheists, because at this point it's no longer the Bible. I got to figure out why I believe Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay. And it came to a point where after listening to the Christine Hayes' class, I'm like, the Old Testament is bullshit. There is no reason for me to believe that it is anything inspired in that text at all. New Testament, sure. So the way I rationalize the New Testament is these are what certain men believed back then about Christianity. It was just like if I were to go up and give my testimony to someone about how Jesus saved me or did good things, this was their version of doing that. And that's how I rationalize it. And I saw the humanity in the Gospels and Paul's letters. And that was to me like, yeah, that's what that is. Like, it gave me a nice little jolt. It's like, yeah, I'm going to go with this. And in fact, I feel like I loaded up a few extra points, as a Christian, like, I got this. And then the more I learned about how the text was written, and then I realized, well, it sounds like Jesus never even actually considered himself to be God. He never wanted himself to be worshipped. He did get worshipped in a sense, just kind of like how a person would worship a king. But even those stories, like when you look at the lady who anointed Jesus' head or feet, which one was it? I don't know which lady was it. Depends which gospel you read. I'm like, there's not a single story in this whole thing that even makes sense. Like, they don't agree with each other. Like, who was it? Like, I would think if it was Mary Magdalene, you would freaking know if it was her or not. Okay. Whose house was in it? It depends which gospel you read. And now I'm just kind of realizing there is so much stuff that's in these gospels that just don't line up. Yeah. And which one do you believe? And that's why I got really stuck on trying to learn the historicity of Jesus. And that was chaotic. And Ehrman helped out a lot with that. Like, he's like, yeah, he was an apocalyptic preacher. And then I can't remember where I've heard it, but I don't think it was from Ehrman. I think it was from someone else. And I fully support this. And it said, if you do not understand Second Temple Judaism, you will not understand the New Testament.
100%. Yeah.
And I'm like, what's Second Temple Judaism? I had no idea. So I learned about it. Oh my goodness. Like, it's so much more. Like, the more I learn about Second Temple Judaism, the more that the things are mentioned in the Gospels, the things that Paul mentions, the things that are mentioned by the non-Pauline epistles, this all makes perfect sense. Like, I was praying for God to give me answers. I was getting answers. just not the ones I was wanting.
Yeah.
And so it was really frustrating. So to a point, it came about where I no longer believed in hell. That was another philosophical issue, that listening to apologists debate with atheists and agnostics, I'm like, again, I'm finding myself agreeing with all these atheists more so than the Christians. I'm like, oh, this is not good. This isn't a good sign. And and then I started realizing, wait, a lot of these apologists' arguments aren't Christian arguments. These are
You're fine.
Yeah, sorry, there was a phone call.
Sorry.
These are deistic arguments. I'm like, oh, good God, like, this is true. Like, these guys are preaching Christianity, but these are deistic arguments, and there is a huge chasm between saying that Jesus is God and saying that, yeah, the God of the universe did all this stuff. In which my perspective is, I always tell people this, like, I don't care if you believe in a God. That is fine. We cannot disprove God. Can't prove God. There is not proof for God, hence the faith. A lot of Christians try to prove God, but there is still no scientific evidence for it, let alone trying to define God to have those parameters. And so when Christians actually tell me, like, what would evidence for God look like then, as if like I'm strawmanning them, I'm like, I tell them, like, look up Michikaku, look up string theory. Like, it's fascinating. Michikaku completely believes in intelligent design, and he's also an atheist. More or less, an atheist. I don't know if you call himself a full-blown atheist or not, but and I tell him, like, look up all the data that's been going on string theory for the last several decades, and that is what scientific evidence for a supposed God would eventually kind of look like. It's not like, oh, look at creation. That's not proof for a God.
Yeah,
that's you saying, oh, this thing matches my ideology, and this God matches my ideology. That's not proof.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir in many ways. I don't know. I wouldn't hold myself to be atheist, more agnostic, but maybe there's an overlap in that anyway.
There is.
And there's certainly a lot of times, many times throughout the day, I'm an atheist. By all means, like, for sure, I have my moments throughout the day that are innumerable that I'm like, oh, I don't think I was particularly living guided by some form of being at that moment. I just was doing my thing. And it intrigues me that at a very core base value, we can look at how human beings develop and evolve to desire religion as a narrative structure, right? The power of myth as one way to kind of like help us have meaning and purpose and feel safe and secure and whatever that is. And this is a problem for a lot of people that deconstruct, is they lose that and they feel very unsafe and they feel an existential crisis and holy shit, I'm going to be just worm food. Are you kidding me? Like, that whole thing is quite unsettling. Was that something that you, as you started to realize, gosh, I think I'm maybe leaning into quite a bit of atheist thought? If I'm not fully atheist, I'm certainly mostly atheist. How did you handle and deal with that kind of process?
It wasn't until the fall of 2019 that I was really dealing with the whole. I would never consider myself an atheist still in middle of 2019. Like, because again, I thought atheists was claim that God does not exist. Like that was my understanding of atheism, and that's a big misconception.
Yeah.
And so I worshipped Jesus. I don't know if he was God. I don't know if he was the Son of God. And I'd already dismissed hell as well. And I wanted to live like Jesus lived. But at that point, I still consider myself a Christian in philosophy. All right, a philosophical Christian. We had stopped going to church. It was too painful. There was just way too much BS being taught from the pulpit, just mostly because it was either historically inaccurate or textually inaccurate. Because, man, I hit the books hard that 9 months, you know, and just cramming as much information. Because, again, I'm at work. I'm just looking at a computer, looking at imagery all day, and I am just consuming as much info as I possibly can because my salvation literally relies on it.
Right. Which is strange, though, because you became an atheist, so that usually means that you don't take things seriously and you don't take the Bible seriously, or, you know.
Finally, I came to the realization that if Jesus existed, which I believe he did, I do not think he was God. I believe he was a Messiah. And a lot of Christians are ignorant on a lot of these terminologies. Like a Messiah, when you look at the Old Testament, when you look at Judaism, it was a physical king sent to save Israel from oppression. And there were a lot of messiahs in Jesus' time. And I fully believed that he thought he was some sort of apocalyptic messiah chosen by God to save Israel, to save Judaism from Rome. And I fully believe that he thought that God was going to send someone down, the Son of Man, because sometimes Jesus calls himself Son of Man, sometimes he talks about the Son of Man, third person. I don't know if Jesus knew if he was a Son of Man or not. I thought, well, maybe God will make me the Son of Man. I can actually be that savior for Israel. Yep. And so when you look at the earliest gospel in Mark, when he says, God, why have you forsaken me? I feel like he felt like abandoned by God because he felt like God was actually leading him on this mission to save Israel. And he trusted God up until the very last minute. Even crucified, like, God, now's a really good time to show up. Please show up. And then when he knew he was getting ready to die, he died.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I believe his followers didn't know how to make heads from tails of that. You know, when people, I had seen visions of Jesus. I have seen demonic and angelic presences, all under high stressful situations. We know that people who have lost important people to death see them again in visions and hallucinations. I have no doubt that the disciples believed that they saw something and thought that Jesus was resurrected, even if just from a metaphorical perspective. Yeah. Because when you look at resurrection, there's a lot of other gods and deities in Greek and Roman history that were resurrected. Were they actually really resurrected, or were we just talking about their spirit? Mike Lacona, debating Airman, when Airman says, hey, those zombies that broke out of the tombs and started talking to people when Jesus died, was that literal or metaphorical? And Airman kept on pressing the question because Mike Lacona would not answer the damn question. He's like, well, I think it's
Christians
metaphorical.
do not like that bit. We just don't, that part is not in the Easter story, right? It's like, oh yeah, and then 500 people, or however many it is, to start wandering around, climbing out of graves, and like,
and so Michael
from the Passion play that we're putting on with the youth.
Exactly, and Michael Lacona straight up says, no, that's a totally metaphorical thing. It's the genre. It was talking about how grandiose the death of Jesus was. And I'm like, then what? How the hell do you determine what was metaphorical and wasn't? Was the ascension, going back to that, was that metaphorical or was it literal? And so I have not shared this with anyone else. So you're the first person. I was thinking about saving this for the actual anniversary, but I was at work and I was having a meltdown, and I was trying to come up with a way to reconcile being a legitimate Christian with what I now know, with not even just theories, but with actual facts, actual historical knowledge that I possessed. And how do I reconcile that with Jesus? and I had to write it down. And so I'm just going to hold this up here right now. So I literally wrote this on a Post-it note from work. I don't know if you can read that or not. Can you read that?
We are sure.
No, I'm sorry. I'll just read it. So
that's a small writing. Add some.
I wrote it. So Wednesday.
Your handwriting is nearly as bad as mine.
I wrote it. So Wednesday, October 9th, 2019, the day I concluded. ... I can't say it. I literally wrote, I can't say it. This is how dramatic I can be sometimes. But this was gut wrenching for me. If I'm gonna say, I could not say it, so I'm gonna write it down. I would literally say, I love you, Jesus, but I can no longer consider myself a Christian. I will apply your teachings. May your grace abound. Because if I was wrong, and if Jesus actually is God,
you're gonna need that grace.
I'm gonna need that grace. And I tried everything to have him be real. I pleaded for God so many times to be fucking real.
Yeah.
And I needed him to. And I was left with silence, the same way my wife was as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many times I prayed myself to sleep after writing that. Jesus, like I'm terrified.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely terrified. And it's and that's the trauma. That's the indoctrination that religion does to people.
Yep.
And you know, sorry for getting wishy-washy or whatever. So I've kept this
That's good.
because this is important. I also have a picture of a painting of Jesus that was painted when I got saved. So I had both. I took a picture of the painting that some person prayed during a gospel presentation. That when I rededicated my life at 14, I have a picture of that painting from when I accepted Christ and started following Him. And then, I'm sorry, when He accepted me to follow Him. That's the correct reformed way of saying it. So much bullshit. Sorry. So I had both, and I call myself an agnostic, and because I didn't know what to believe, I was so just going to follow Jesus' teachings, and Christianity had done so much harm, and I could no longer consider myself a Christian. And then, if God wanted to change His mind and reveal Himself, I am still here. I will pick up that phone call if He ever wants to call me and say, "Hey, Will, straighten up."
Yeah.
And so, in fact, I talked with a friend from church just a few weeks ago. You know, he wanted to pray for healing for me. I told him, no, I do not want you to pray for healing for me. He was kind of put off by that because I already told him, no, I didn't want him to. So he pressed again. He's like, what will it take for you to believe in God then? Like, it seems like no one thing is going to convince you. I'm like, Him showing up right here in the parking lot is what will convince me. Him, not only just me seeing it, but you seeing it. And Him saying, hey, Will, I'm Jesus, I'm God, yes, I am real. And then I'll pull out my camera and I'll record that shit. And then I'll go into the restaurant that we were staying at and I'll pull out a waitress. I'm like, waitress, can you see this person? Got 3 different people saying that, yes, we can see God right here, right now, talking to us.
That's funny.
Now, is God all powerful? Then He can freaking do that.
Yep.
Does He want to avoid me from going to hell? He should want to do that.
Hopefully. Yeah, it's
so either He doesn't give a shit about me, or He's not there. It's one of those two. Now, I'm not keen on, as we discussed, like having yes or no situations, but I can't think of a different situation. Either He is completely. We're talking about the evangelical Judeo-Christian God here. Okay, we're not talking about other gods. But the God that I believe in, Jesus, if He wants to save me from hell, He is absolutely capable of knowing how to reach me.
Yeah. It's interesting. Have you come across, I've had Thomas J. Ord on, and I know like Greg Boyd and some other Christian figures hold to something called open theism. Have you come across open theism or open relational theology? Because
so I've heard of a lot of things in passing, because I've had a lot of Christians try to win me back. I've had a lot of Christians say, hey, or theists say, hey, well, why don't you try this? Because I explore Buddhism a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know the gentleman that you speak of specifically.
So the concept is a fascinating concept, if nothing else, just from a metaphysical kind of philosophical exploration. But it basically it is underpinned by the first presumption that you make, where God is all powerful, and it says where does it actually
exactly?
And so actually their premise is, so Thomas Ord has a book called God Can't, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not the best introduction to maybe the best introduction to it, but it's not the best outworking of it. I think there's some ones that go a bit more in depth, but the concept that no, God can't do certain things. He is driven by a certain set of ethics. His nature, his being, prohibits him from doing, or her or it or whatever, from doing certain things, if you believe in God as a personality. And it's a very fascinating kind of branch within Christianity. It really intrigues me. And I think just as someone that loves looking into random stuff, you might find that really interesting. Because it is a fascinating, I mean, we're all, what isn't metaphysical, right? When we're talking about God, like, right, it's just all as playing philosophers, right? We're talking about like something that is not there, at least based on any of our actual senses, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it might be there, but we don't know. It's like people arguing about what happens after you die, and it's like we don't know, right? We don't know. So let's argue. Let's come up with some cool ideas, and even live your life based on that if it makes you a better person and then helps you live this life. But we don't know. Like we do know that we don't know, right? Unfortunately, not a lot of people say no. I don't know that. I really do know. But it is fascinating. Like, and that must. I mean, that realization is such a hard brick wall to hit after running so hard for decades at this point.
Yeah.
And you're talking about like just like that, in your bed, like praying to a God that you don't even believe anymore, going, God, if you are there, I really want you to be there, or whatever, Did you find a natural kind of how did you get from there to where you are now? Are you still there at times? Do you still think, oh God, I miss God, or I wish there was God, or I'm scared there's a God? Or what was the process of like coming out of that?
It helped dismissing hell already before I was a Christian. Or while I was still a Christian, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I'd already dismissed hell. And so that was one of the other things. I'm like, then why do I need Jesus? There's no hell. Didn't he die for my sins? So of course, that was also a later development within the church, that belief. And so actually, to your point, that is God all powerful. That was one of the things that actually kept me a Christian during that. Like, well, there are clearly things that God can't do. Can God lie? Nope. Can God learn anything new? Oh no, he can't learn anything new. So, and there are different things. But nevertheless, it's like, what is this God then? Like, who is he, and how do we relate to him? And that's where the agnostic part comes in. It's like, if there's a God out there, great. But what does it matter if there is? And it goes to the divine hiddenness issue. Is like, a God that is silent, a God that doesn't interact is no different, or a God that is silent is no different than a God's not there. And that hit me pretty hard too. And but to answer your question, it wasn't about hell. Like, a lot of Christians, like, you were just, you're just trying to get your fire insurance. Like, even when I was praying to God, it wasn't necessarily just about hell. In fact, that was very little bit of it. I loved Jesus.
Yeah.
I loved him. And I felt like I was abandoning him.
Yeah.
So it's not
grieving that relationship, right? I mean, it's literally,
exactly.
It's like a divorce. It's like a death of a loved one or something like that. Yeah, that's intense. Yeah. But was that just like a divorce or a death of a loved one? Was it just a thing of like time heals all wounds, or is that kind of how you see your process of getting through that or over that?
When I was realizing that so much of the things I experienced and knew was essentially a product of my own, I don't want to use imagination, but a product of it was a product of religion is what it was. And we had created these parameters, and by one, all these walls started coming down. I kind of realized, like, there's no house here to begin with. Okay. Like, there's not even a foundation. Like, what is all this? And I think that's what religion does. It likes to give, like you said earlier, religion is good at giving people order and constructs and how to a type of schedule, even on how to work life out. But the people who become fundamentalists, and I believe pretty much if most evangelicals, in my opinion, are fundamentalists just because of their view on biblical inerrancy in general. When they take religion to be so literally that they are creating people to end up like me. A pastor that I still keep in touch with, and most of my friends are actually still Christians, he was like, I don't think that you'd be an atheist now if you weren't so fundamental when you first got raised. I'm like, you're probably right. You're probably absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, there's good solid data on when you look at the groups of people that are leaving church, that are leaving Christianity, on the whole. And it's not to say that all of them are this, but on the whole, there are more people in that group that are more educated in their faith, were more passionate, were more involved in their faith than if you just grabbed 100 people in the church on average and said, oh, how many
Right.
people are going 5 times a week? How many people are reading their Bible incessantly and can quote it nonstop and are reading books and watching lectures in their own time? Like that group are much more represented in people that leave actually than people that stay.
I
Which
think
is
I know why.
component. Well,
Yeah.
it's, I mean, that's a natural part, right? I mean, it's
Right.
anything you study more and more. It's like anyone that's an expert in their field will, generally speaking, be a lot more cagey about making absolute statements about that field, right? And so your wife's got a master. What was your wife's degree in? Was it chemistry?
Master's in chemistry.
Yeah. So she is going to know way more about chemistry than you or me. Generally speaking, I feel fairly safe saying that. But when she makes statements about chemistry, I'm sure at times she's not black and white. Because she's like, well, it's actually a lot more complex. It's a lot more, you know what I mean? It's like people with a political degree, probably a little less black and white, hopefully. I don't know, maybe not. Politics is just a weird one, right? But it's just that thing of like, once you study, once you educate yourself on stuff, you start to realize, oh, this is more complex than I thought. And actually, it's not so black and white. It's one of the things I love about Ehrman, is he holds to more of an agnostic position, you know, whatever that is. But he's not trying to make people agnostic. He's not trying to deconvert anyone. He's just saying, look, let's look at these facts. What you do with that is up to you. And many people still hold on to that and reimagine their Christianity. And that's really a beautiful and wonderful thing if they can do that. But I love that he's got that open-handed approach because and he's studied it enough to go, well, I know this works for some Christians. I also know it doesn't work for me, and that's why I can't be a Christian anymore. But yeah, it's really fascinating. The whole journey is a fascinating one for sure.
I think people like him and like the educated people that you're talking about, like we are on I'm not that educated, but I do try to study this stuff. I'm not professionally educated.
I was going to say, one of the things that I loved about your account and got me following your account is that you are clearly educated. You are maybe not formally educated in those areas, but you share stuff and I'm like, oh, this guy's been reading. This guy's been studying. Like you said stuff and I was like, oh gosh, yeah. Because a lot of things like I've recognized because I've read it or studied it and I'm like, oh, he's also done the work that I've done at some point. So you clearly put some hard graft in. And I think that's something that people recognize relatively easily, or at least if they've also maybe done some of that work. I don't know. Maybe you don't otherwise. I don't know. But it's interesting. There is like this kind of hierarchy of education as well, and for some good reasons that like we're probably not going to pass as like having our doctorates in divinity or anything like that. We'd probably fail in those rooms, but the amount of work that someone like yourself has done in reading, researching, watching lectures, reading Bart Ehrman, doing that stuff, it does pay off, and it does help you develop what you know, but it also is helping people that are following you now and looking to you to go, oh, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? That's a really a very important and profound way to use that self-education. But yeah, sorry,
no, thanks.
I put myself down for the same thing a lot, like, but I think, you are very clearly educated, just not maybe in the sense that a lot of, and it's hard because when you self-educate, you generally speaking spend a lot of time reading very educated people, right? So then you just feel even more unqualified because you're like, well, I mean, like, are you kidding? Like, how many degrees does Ehrman have? I don't know. He probably like just collects degrees like candy. Right. I don't know.
I get it. That gives me a nice little way out though. So when people are like, well, why are you saying this? I'm like, I'm just saying what these experts say.
Exactly. And that's the beauty, right? And that's actually what a lot of experts do as well, is they go, well, like, let's look at this branch of, experts. Yeah. Ehrman does this all the time, right? Doesn't he? He's like constantly going, look, this is just kind of the academic consensus. I'm not telling you something that's Bart Ehrman's idea. I've just looked across the board at all the experts, and there's a few outliers here or there, but across the board, most people are saying, no, Jesus wasn't born in a stable. We're pretty confident of that. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. And so he's pulling on those kind of like different experts, and I think that's it's a sensible, educated thing to do, to learn. I don't know, and I'm not going to have people pretend. Yes. I'm not going to pretend to know. I'm going to point to someone that does know and go, look, go read what that guy says. He's going to be a much better source than I will. It took me a long time to come to that place. I used to be an expert in everything as a Christian. right? Providing nothing, but like,
Right.
yeah.
I think and I think this is the other element that, we need to get comfortable with saying, I don't know, and not being so certain about things.
Mm,
But I also think that we need to start realizing what is actually concrete and what is factual, or what is reasonably historically
yeah,
factual. I
absolutely.
think when we kind of, or at least a lot of Christians, evangelical Christians, tend to, well, people, it doesn't really matter if it's Christian or not, people tend to, especially like conspiracy theorists, they like to deny facts and create their own. And
Yeah,
that is to me the definition of a fundamentalist. They deny what we know to be true within reality and they replace it with their own. And that is what I see evangelical Christians do all the time.
yeah,
So, like when I said earlier that people who believe that the Bible is inerrant are fundamentalists, I absolutely believe that is the case, because we know for a fact the Bible has errors. We know for
sure,
a fact
absolutely.
there are a ton of historical inaccuracies. This was not written by a God. This was written by man, unless God is intentionally trying to lie to people, which that's a whole other can of words we're not going to get into. And so when people say that this is a reality, that the Bible is 100% true, that is a fundamentalist, because they are denying what is true and replacing with their own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at just how religion evolves, right? I mean, religion is an answer to a question. Generally speaking, you look through history and
Mm-hmm.
you look at it anthropologically and you go, here's a culture, the sun's gone down, they've just shat themselves, they don't know what to do. They're like, oh my God, is that thing coming back? What's going on? And where's this? What's that? The moon? I don't know. Like, and so they start worshiping the moon god or praying to the sun god that it'll beat the moon god and it'll come back. And then eventually, how many people do you know, Will, that worship the sun gods in the hope that it comes back every day? Like, are they like burning their firstborn child overnight, so that, the sun comes? Nobody. Why? Because we
Yeah.
now know how the sun and moon work. And we figured
Right.
out that it's got pretty much nothing to do with any of us. Believe it or not, they're going to keep doing that for a long time after we're gone. And there's an element of like just education erodes certain mystical answers that we have created.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that to say that there is no force behind some of these things. I'm not saying that there isn't a force that goes, hey, let's have a sun there and a moon there and we'll spin them around and do that. That's fine. But
Mm-hmm.
but we are constantly getting new information. Like you're saying about the Bible, it's like, okay, cool,
Mm-hmm.
the Bible's right about everything. And it's like, okay, the Bible said that pi is 3. Now, that's pretty damn close for an ancient civilization. Not bad. Good attempt. But we know that's wrong, right?
Right.
I mean, I've actually had arguments with Christians on this. We're like, well, maybe it's not. And I'm like, no, it's definitely not 3. And they're like, well, maybe it's 3 and it's not 3.1. And I'm like, oh, this is painful. I don't even know how to have
But
this conversation.
that's what they do, though, is like the Bible has become their source of truth
Exactly.
and facts. Like they base things, and that's what I did. That's why
Yeah.
I said evolution was false and that young earth creationism was true,
Yeah.
because the Bible is God's word and God is right, and so
Yeah.
clearly everything else is wrong.
But it's an inability to distinguish between. So the Bible is a spiritual text book. Exploring spirituality, exploring the divine, exploring who we are, maybe even a philosophical and ethical book, maybe guiding us our morality. It's always maybe even historical. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's tracking certain kings and what they did and what happened and wars that happened. All these things. Yes, it's a book full of poetry. It's a book full of whatever. But it is not at any point meant to be a science book
Right.
or a maths book or a geology book, and I think the danger is when we make it this kind of like everything it says must be correct. There could be no human element in it. When it makes a mathematical statement, you go, oh crap, now we have to question maths and not this book. Right?
Right.
Or it goes, the ant is the most hardworking solitary animal, and it's like, not a biologist, but I've looked at biologists and I've watched a David Attenborough documentary or two, and ants aren't solitary. Like, they work together with other ants. Like,
Right.
I can't actually get my head around how they got that wrong. Like, I mean, like, who wrote that? Like, that's like, did you spend any time watching that ant that you saw? Like, you spend more than 3 seconds and it will join up with the rest of the ants. But because the Bible is the word of God and we've got to hold it up, now it's questioning biology. And it's this inability to go, well, hold on, let's look at a biology expert and hundreds of years of biology to inform our biology and put the Bible on the side and go, could humans writing this make an analogy using their limited understanding of biology, their limited understanding of maths or whatever? Could they be drawing from that to make a point that still might be relevant? Maybe there's still a relevance to working as hard as they perceive that ant worked. But let's not try and make that a biological textbook on how ants operate, because we know that's not true. It's this really weird dynamic. And it's the same. It's why people listen to their pastor about coronavirus instead of a immunologist or something like that. Like listen to an expert in the field. It frustrates me. It's why people listen to a celebrity about vaccination rather than again, someone that's an expert in the field. Like it's not hard to do, but we listen to complete very smart, very interesting, very clever, very well-meaning people that have no background in these areas. And I think that's someone like Bart Ehrman. Again, you bring up Bart Ehrman, I'm going to jump on it because I love him. But I mean, this guy knows his New Testament, and he'd be the first to say, "Hey, that's Old Testament. Don't grill me too much about that. It's not my expertise." And I'm like, this guy knows the Bible better than I do, 100%. He probably knows the Old Testament better than I do, but he's still quick to go, not an expert in the Old Testament. Right. Let's talk about the New Testament. Or if you want to talk about the Old Testament, I'll point you in some directions. And I think it's the same deal with, whatever. We should be going, let's look at this person in the Bible. What were they an expert in? Exploring spirituality, talking about what God is and who we are. They weren't an expert in maths, right? I mean, almost certain. Maybe they were. I don't know. It doesn't record many mathematicians in the Bible. But I'm just astonished by how we just fail to make those kind of like intuitive like decisions of like, what's this person an expert in, and what will I listen to them for? It's just terrifying. It's really, really terrifying.
It really is.
But but we do it everywhere.
It destroys. I mean, religion directly destroys people's ability to think critically.
But I mean, it's definitely heavily overlapped with religion. But I know many people outside of religion that still do it. I know many people outside of religion that still look to Trump for medical advice rather than a doctor. Or, do you know what I mean? Like, and so the overlap there is a big. Now, the Venn diagram is almost a circle on that. I will give you that.
Right.
But actually, I do know a huge chunk of people that aren't religious and with Trump for some other reason and still go, well, this is a great advice, and doctors are putting out paper after paper going, please don't take this drug. It's really dangerous. And they're like, well, Trump's an expert. And it's like, maybe in something.
It's definitely not
he's
just
smart in certain things.
Yeah, it's definitely not just religion for sure. But, it's...
Religion does it better than most.
It definitely can. Of course, not all religions do. I get it. We're speaking generalizations here, but it just be safe. Think critically. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. If that's really what it comes down to is like I know people who would straight up drink that Kool-Aid from Jonestown straight up without question, and that terrifies me. And they have children. They're good parents, but at the exact same time, it's like. Childhood indoctrination is a horrible thing. The things that's happening to women equality, that's starting to get a little bit better. That's a horrible thing. The thing with LGBTQ community and deconversion or conversion therapy is there is just so much horrible things going on out there done by people who do not have the authority to do it. First off, they think they have the authority because they're speaking from God. But then like with conversion therapy, it's like you literally have people who would have an associate's degree or no degree at all giving psychological advice to gays on how to become straight. Yeah. No, like that's not cool.
So far removed from the right. If there was a right person to do that, you would not be that person.
Exactly.
And the fact is that there is no one that's the right person to do that that is doing it, which suggests that anyone that's educated enough goes, we shouldn't be doing that. And that's, that's where you follow through. It's just wild.
I do love what you said about, like how Aaron says, I don't talk about the Old Testament. It's like, there's a lot of things I don't talk about. People ask me a lot about my opinion on Islam. Like, I know nothing about Islam. The only thing I know about Islam is I was at war with their country for a few years or with Islam. And that's really about it. I never read the Quran. I simply say, I don't know. People like to ask me for, so this is something, and we should probably end this here pretty soon, but this is like one of the things that really personally has been bothering me lately is the whole trauma thing. Like with so many Christians have gone through trauma, and there is a lot of ex-Christians and people kind of deconstructing, giving all this traumatic advice. And I'm like, I'm not sure you're qualified to say some of these things. Some of these things kind of sound kind of concerning. And so when people ask me about trauma, like, oh, what should I do about this? I'm like, I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah, go speak to a psychologist.
I don't know.
100% of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So it makes me really happy that we do have, especially on Instagram, so many psychologists who are straight up psychologists, and they do help out specifically with deconverting therapy and things like that.
Yeah.
And like dealing with the mind fuck that we call religion sometimes, and evangelical fundamentalism.
No, absolutely. The secular therapy, for people listening and are looking for something, the Secular Therapy Project is a fantastic movement for that. Like, it's just really great. But yeah, I mean, it's just, and we've most of us have grown up in churches where the pastors are the therapists and they're unqualified and they're doing it terribly. And so, like, I think it's a big step to realize, wow, this is a whole industry that is here to help me, full of people that just genuinely want to help you get healthy and better. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's exciting to be getting free of those kind of things. So yeah, people should definitely go to a therapist, not some random person on Instagram for your trauma therapy, for sure. Unless maybe the person on Instagram is a therapist, but maybe ask to see some sort of credentials.
That'd be nice. That'd be good.
Absolutely. Will, thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. It's been really great. Sorry we went over, but I really appreciate you giving me the time. It was wonderful. Yeah. Really enjoyed connecting, getting to meet you, have a face to put to the conversations that we have and things like that.
No, great. Thank my wife. My wife is the one that was babysitting the birds for the last 2.5 hours, and the birds are being kind of loud. So should probably rescue her now.
They're getting cooped up. They're getting fed up.
Yeah. Cool, man. Hey, that was great.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you. All right. Well, I'll let you know when it goes live, and I'll let you know. It might even be October by now. I don't even know my schedule, but I've filmed quite a few recently, so I'm cramming them in. But it was really great. I appreciate what you're doing. I think the work you're doing is really important and really helpful. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much, man.
All right. Love you, man. Catch you later.
You too. Peace. Bye.